What if death wasn't an end, but a doorway? For countless ancient cultures, the rituals surrounding burial were far more than practical acts. They were sacred bridges between worlds, crafted with care to honor the departed and comfort the living. Picture this: a pharaoh's body meticulously prepared for eternity with spices and linen, or a warrior laid to rest with his sword, poised for battles in the afterlife. These traditions weren't just about saying goodbye. They were profound expressions of belief, love, and even hope for what lies beyond. Today, we're stepping into the shadows of history to uncover 40 of the most captivating burial rituals from civilizations long past, each one a testament to how deeply humanity has always grappled with the mystery of death. Think about the last time you attended a funeral or memorial. The flowers, the songs, the stories shared, these moments connect us across time, echoing practices that stretch back thousands of years. Ancient societies poured their creativity, resources, and deepest convictions into commemorating their dead, leaving behind clues that still move us today. From the towering stone tombs of Ireland's Newgrange, where sunlight pierces the darkness on the winter solstice, to the Zoroastrian towers of silence, where bodies were left to return to the elements, every ritual reveals a unique philosophy about life's fleeting nature. Some cultures celebrated death with feasts, others feared spirits so much they buried their dead with stones atop them. What unites them all is this: a desire to make sense of the unknown. This journey won't just show you how people were buried, it'll show you how they lived. Behind every ritual is a story of community, spirituality, and the unshakable human need to leave a mark. You'll discover why the Vikings sent their chiefs to the afterlife in burning ships, why the ancient Scythians surrounded their dead with golden treasures, and how the Maya used vibrant colors to guide souls through the underworld. These practices are more than historical footnotes. They're mirrors reflecting our shared humanity. So take a deep breath. We're about to travel across continents and centuries, unraveling the beautiful, the eerie, and the astonishing ways civilizations have whispered to the future through their dead. Ready? Let's begin. The ancient Egyptians didn't just preserve bodies, they built bridges to eternity. Their mummification process was a sacred art, blending science and spirituality in a way that still captivates us today. Imagine a team of priests working for weeks, carefully removing organs and placing them in ornate canopic jars, each guarded by a different deity. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were preserved separately, while the heart believed to hold the soul remained in the body. Then came the natron, a special salt that dried the flesh, followed by layers of linen strips coated in resin, transforming the body into a durable vessel for the afterlife. But this wasn't just a practical task. Every step was a prayer, a ritual to ensure the deceased could recognize their own form in the next world. Even ordinary Egyptians hoped for this transformation, though their mummification was far simpler than the pharaoh's lavish treatments. A farmer might be wrapped in reused linen, his organs buried beside him in clay pots instead of gold-rimmed jars. Yet the belief was the same: death was a journey, and the body was the ticket. Tutankhamun's tomb, with its golden mask and nested coffins, shows us the peak of this practice, but it's the everyday mummies, the merchants, the mothers, the children, that reveal how deeply this belief ran through society. Families spent years saving for burials, trading goods for amulets, and commissioning Book of the Dead scrolls to guide their loved ones through the underworld. This obsession with eternity shaped everything. Artisans honed their skills crafting burial goods, priests studied anatomy to perfect embalming, and tomb builders designed labyrinths to deter thieves. The entire economy thrived on death, but not out of fear, out of love. To the Egyptians, preserving a body wasn't morbid, it was an act of hope. They weren't hiding from death, they were preparing for another life. And in a way, they succeeded. Thousands of years later, their mummies still speak to us, their faces eerily lifelike, their stories etched in hieroglyphs. They wanted to be remembered, and thanks to their meticulous rituals, they truly achieved immortality. But Egypt wasn't the only culture that turned burial into an art. Far to the north, the Vikings had a very different vision of the afterlife, one that involved roaring flames and open seas. When a great Norse chieftain died, his people didn't just bury him, they sent him off in style with a ship piled high with treasures, weapons, and even sacrificed animals. The vessel would be set ablaze, its sails catching fire as it drifted toward the horizon, a spectacular farewell for a warrior bound for Valhalla. These ship burials weren't just about destruction, they were about transformation. The Vikings believed the flames purified the dead, carrying them to Odin's hall, where they'd feast and fight until Ragnarok. Some chiefs were buried in actual ships, like the stunning Osberg ship in Norway, its oak hull filled with carvings of serpents and gods. Others were laid to rest in stone settings shaped like vessels, their outlines still visible in the grass centuries later. What's striking is how personal these rituals were. A warrior might be buried with his sword and shield, a weaver with her loom, a mother with her prized brooches. The Vikings didn't just honor death, they honored the life that came before it, ensuring the dead had everything they'd need for the next adventure. And sometimes that included companions. A few graves reveal shocking evidence of human sacrifice, likely servants or slaves sent to serve their masters beyond the grave. It's a dark reminder that not all burial customs were gentle, even when they were deeply meaningful. From the deserts of Egypt to the fjords of Scandinavia, these rituals show us how differently cultures approach the same universal mystery. One preserved the body for eternity, the other burned it to free the soul. But both shared a common thread: the unshakable belief that death wasn't an end, but a beginning. And as we'll see, that belief took countless other forms across the ancient world. The Vikings weren't alone in their belief that the afterlife required a vessel. Across the globe, ancient cultures saw boats as more than transportation. They were spiritual guides, carrying souls to the next world. Take the ancient Egyptians, who buried their dead with miniature model boats, complete with tiny oarsmen ready to row the deceased through the celestial rivers of the underworld. These weren't toys, they were sacred tools, carefully crafted to navigate the perilous journey described in the Book of the Dead. Even the sun god Ra traveled by boat, so why wouldn't a pharaoh? But the most haunting maritime burials come from the Philippines' Igorot people, who suspended wooden coffins high on cliff faces, shaped like canoes. The Igorot believed these hanging coffins brought the dead closer to the ancestral spirits, their boats never touching the earth again. Meanwhile, in China's Yangtze River region, archaeologists have uncovered boat-shaped coffins carved from whole tree trunks, some dating back over 3,000 years. The Chu people placed them in caves or submerged them in rivers, trusting the water to carry their loved ones to paradise. What's fascinating is how these traditions mirror each other across continents, as if humanity instinctively linked boats to passage beyond death. The Celts of Britain buried their chieftains in boat-shaped stone settings, while the Haida of the Pacific Northwest laid their dead in cedar canoes atop mortuary poles facing the sea. Even today, the symbolism lingers. Think of the phrase, crossing over, or the image of Charon's ferry in Greek myth, but no one took ship burials to grander extremes than the Vikings. The Osberg ship, discovered in Norway in 1904, wasn't just a grave, it was a time capsule. Inside its elegantly curved hull lay two women, possibly a queen and her servant, surrounded by sledges, tapestries, and even a cart with intricately carved wheels. The ship's prow coiled like a serpent, a nod to the myths that would guide them. Forensic analysis revealed a darker detail. The younger woman likely died violently, perhaps sacrificed to accompany her mistress. These burials weren't just about wealth, they were about identity. A warrior's ship might be packed with axes and shields, while a trader's could hold scales and foreign coins. In Sweden's Vendel graves, nobles were buried with full suits of armor, their helmets adorned with scenes from legends they'd now join. The Vikings didn't just bury objects, they buried stories, ensuring the dead arrived in Valhalla with their sagas intact. Yet for all their grandeur, Viking ship burials had a practical side. Burning a ship prevented grave robbers from looting its treasures, and the ashes left behind were thought to purify the land. Some scholars argue the flames also symbolized cremation's transformative power, turning flesh into smoke that could rise to the gods. It's a reminder that even the most elaborate rituals served multiple purposes, honoring the dead, comforting the living, and reinforcing societal values. From the fjords to the Yangtze, these boat burials whisper the same truth. Death was a voyage, and every culture built its own vessel. But as we'll see, not all journeys required water. Some souls were sent skyward, their bodies returning to the elements in ways that would defy modern imagination. High in the thin air of the Tibetan plateau, death takes on an entirely different form, one that might unsettle the uninitiated but holds deep reverence for those who practice it. Tibetan sky burials, known as jeta, transform the act of mourning into a final act of generosity. Instead of sealing their loved ones in the earth or burning them on pyres, families carry the deceased to remote mountaintops where the body is carefully prepared and left for vultures. To outsiders, this may seem jarring, but for Tibetan Buddhists, it's the purest expression of their beliefs. The body is merely a vessel, and in death, it should nourish other living beings. This ritual is shaped by both spirituality and necessity. The rocky, frozen ground of the Himalayas makes traditional burial nearly impossible, and with timber scarce, cremation is often reserved for high lamas or those with significant means. But practicality isn't the only reason. Sky burial embodies the Buddhist principle of impermanence, the idea that all things, even our physical forms, are transient. By offering their bodies to the birds, the dead participate in the cycle of life one last time, their flesh-sustaining creatures that will soar over the same peaks they once called home. The ceremony itself is solemn and precise. Monks chant from sacred texts, guiding the soul through the bardo, the transitional state between death and rebirth. A rogyapa, or body breaker, performs the careful dismemberment, often using ritual tools to separate bone from flesh. Every step is deliberate, every gesture a prayer. Vultures, seen as Dakini's celestial beings, circle overhead, waiting to fulfill their sacred role. In Tibetan belief, if the birds consume the body completely, it's a sign the deceased lived a virtuous life. Any remains left behind might prompt further prayers for the soul's purification. What's striking is how this practice challenges conventional Western views of death. Where many cultures preserve or hide the body, Tibetans expose it openly, embracing decomposition as natural and even holy. There's no coffin, no embalming, no attempt to delay the inevitable. Instead, there's a profound acceptance, a recognition that death isn't an enemy to defeat but a part of existence to honor. Families don't visit grave sites, they remember their loved ones through prayer and the knowledge that their physical offering helped sustain life in a harsh landscape. Sky burials also reflect a deep ecological wisdom. In a world where land and resources are precious, this ritual leaves no footprint. no tombstones to weather, no chemicals leaching into the soil. It's a return to the earth in the most direct way possible, a lesson in sustainability woven into spiritual practice. Even the vultures, often maligned elsewhere, are revered here as sacred cleaners, nature's own custodians. Yet this tradition faces modern challenges. Climate change and habitat loss have dwindled vulture populations in some areas, while tourism and cultural shifts have led to debates about preserving the practice's privacy and dignity. Still, for many Tibetans, Jeta remains the ultimate act of compassion, a final gift to the living world. It's a reminder that how we treat the dead says everything about how we value life. From the soaring heights of the Himalayas, we now descend to a ritual where grief becomes something tangible, an art form etched in stone. In Sardinia, the ancient Neuragic people didn't just bury their dead. They built monuments to them, crafting eerie stone giants that stood guard over tombs for millennia. These solemn sentinels, with their hollow eyes and weathered features, tell a story of loss turned into legacy. The Moch civilization turned graves into theaters of power, where death wasn't just mourned, it was staged. In the arid valleys of ancient Peru, the elite didn't journey to the afterlife alone. At Sapon, archaeologists uncovered a lord buried in a headdress of gold, his chest draped with crescent-shaped pectorals, surrounded by sacrificed warriors, a priest, and even lamas, all arranged as if frozen in ceremony. These weren't random acts of violence, they were carefully orchestrated rituals designed to ensure the ruler's dominance extended beyond death. The sacrificed retainers, often buried alive or drugged, were believed to become eternal servants in the next world, their presence reinforcing the social order even in eternity. What's chilling is how vividly the Moch documented these practices. Their pottery, masterpieces of realism, show priests offering goblets of blood to skeletal deities, warriors clashing in ritual combat, and bound captives led to their fate. These weren't metaphors, they were blueprints. The famous sacrifice ceremony vessel depicts a ruler drinking from a cup while a prisoner's throat is slit, the blood funneled into the vessel. Art wasn't separate from life, it was a mirror reflecting a world where death and power were inextricably linked. But the Moch weren't unique in their use of sacrificial burials. Half a world away, the Shang Dynasty of China practiced similar rites. Emperors were interred with chariots, bronze vessels, and rows of decapitated retainers, some arranged in tidy lines, their heads placed neatly beside their bodies. Unlike the Moch, the Shang often used prisoners of war, their sacrifices serving as both spiritual offerings and political warnings. Even the ancient Celts had their version, burying chieftains with chariots and horses, sometimes alongside loyal followers who chose to join them voluntarily. What ties these cultures together isn't just brutality, it's belief. The Moch, Shang, and Celts all saw death as a continuation of hierarchy, a realm where kings would still need subjects, warriors would still need weapons, and the cosmic balance had to be maintained. The sacrifices weren't merely about service, they were about symbolism. A lord buried with concubines affirmed his virility, a warrior with his retinue proved his status, and the act of sacrifice itself demonstrated the community's devotion to the gods who controlled life and death. Yet there's a haunting intimacy to these burials. At Sapon, one young woman, likely a concubine, was buried with a silver bowl clutched in her hands, as if she'd been instructed to hold it for her master in the next world. Her posture wasn't one of struggle, but of resignation, even reverence. This complicates the narrative, forcing us to ask, did some victims go willingly, believing in their sacred duty? Or were they coerced by a system that glorified obedience? The answer might lie in the bones. Forensic studies of Moch sacrifices reveal some victims were given hallucinogens, perhaps to ease their passage. a grim kindness in a ritual meant to terrify and awe. The legacy of these practices lingers in modern Peru, where descendants still honor the dead with offerings of food and chicha beer, though the sacrifices are long gone. The Moch remind us that burial rituals are never just about the dead, they're about the living, the power structures they uphold, and the stories they need to tell themselves to make sense of mortality. And as we'll see, some cultures took that storytelling to even more theatrical extremes, turning graves into stages for the divine. Beneath the glittering streets of Paris, where tourists sip coffee and lovers stroll along the Seine, lies a hidden city of the dead, one that turns the very concept of burial upside down. The catacombs of Paris aren't just tunnels, they're a vast, whispering gallery of human remains, where 6 million souls rest in arrangements so precise they border on art. Imagine walking through corridors where femurs are stacked like firewood, skulls aligned in geometric patterns, and tibias crisscrossed to form decorative borders. This isn't the work of some Gothic horror novel, it's the result of an 18th century urban crisis, a solution as pragmatic as it is haunting. By the late 1700s, Paris cemeteries had reached a breaking point. The Cemetery of the Innocents, in the heart of the city, had become so overcrowded that graves were stacked vertically, and decomposing bodies seeped into the water supply. The stench was unbearable, the risk of disease dire, so authorities made a radical decision. They emptied the cemeteries, moving bones by the cartload into abandoned limestone quarries beneath the city. What began as a public health measure soon became something stranger, a kind of collective memorial where the anonymous dead were given order, even beauty, in their new underground home. Workers arranged the bones with eerie precision, sometimes even labeling sections by the cemetery they came from. Skulls were placed in heart-shaped designs or stacked into arches, while long bones formed stabilizing walls. Some niches hold fragments of poetry or plaques bearing sobering reminders like Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort, halt, here lies the empire of death. Yet for all its solemnity, the catacombs also reflect a very French sensibility. Even in decay, there's an insistence on artistry, a refusal to let chaos have the final word. Paris wasn't alone in turning to the earth for solutions. Across the Mediterranean, the early Christians of Rome buried their dead in labyrinthine catacombs, carving shelves into soft volcanic rock to hold bodies wrapped in linen. These tunnels, stretching for miles beneath the city, weren't just practical, they were sacred. Families gathered here to honor martyrs, painting frescoes of biblical scenes on the walls as reminders of resurrection. Unlike Paris' later ossuary, these catacombs kept bodies intact, each niche a temporary resting place until the soul's promised reunion with God. Even older are Malta's hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a 3-level underground necropolis carved over centuries by a prehistoric culture. Here, bodies were laid to rest in oval chambers, their bones later gathered into collective pits, a practice suggesting belief in a communal afterlife. The acoustics of these spaces are so precise that chanting would have resonated unnervingly, turning funerals into immersive spiritual experiences. What ties these underground burials together is more than necessity, it's reverence. Whether to solve overcrowding or commune with the divine, each culture adapted the earth beneath its feet to honor the dead. The Paris catacombs, with their skull-lined arches, might seem macabre, but they're also a testament to resilience, a city literally building new meaning from old bones. And as we'll see, not all societies hid their dead away. Some placed them front and center, turning graves into stages for the living. There's something unsettlingly intimate about staring into the face of Tollund Man. His features, preserved for over 2,000 years in the peat bogs of Denmark, are so lifelike you might expect his eyelids to flutter open. The wrinkles around his nose, the stubble on his chin, even the leather noose still coiled around his neck tells a story frozen in time. But this isn't some macabre accident of nature. Tollund Man, like hundreds of other bog bodies found across northern Europe, is a deliberate offering, a whisper from the Iron Age that challenges everything we assume about ancient spirituality and sacrifice. The bogs, with their cold, acidic, oxygen-poor waters, act as natural time capsules. Tannins in the peat tan the skin like leather, while sphagnum moss suppresses bacteria, leaving hair, fingernails, and even the contents of stomachs eerily intact. Gråbøl Man, another Danish bog body, still bears the grim slash across his throat, his auburn hair stained rust-red by the bog's chemistry. Cloncavan Man, discovered in Ireland, sports an ancient hair gel made of pine resin and plant oil, a fashion statement preserved alongside his brutal axe wounds. These aren't just corpses, they're snapshots of moments when the veil between the human and divine was razor-thin. What's chilling isn't just the preservation, it's the evidence of ritual. Many bog bodies show signs of calculated violence, strangulation, stab wounds, blunt force trauma, yet their poses often suggest ceremony, not chaos. Tollund Man's eyes are closed, his lips slightly parted as if in sleep. Id Girl, found in the Netherlands, was draped with a woolen cloak over her face, her hair half-shaved, a style possibly marking her as an outcast or chosen one. Archaeologists debate whether these were criminals, prisoners of war, or willing offerings to gods like Nerthus, the Earth Mother, whose favor ensured fertile harvests. The answer may lie in their last meals. Tollund Man's stomach contained a gruel of barley and flaxseed, but also traces of ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus that might have induced visions before his final journey. The bogs weren't just graves, they were sacred thresholds. To the Celts and Germanic tribes, these watery landscapes were gateways to the otherworld, places where the ordinary rules of decay didn't apply. Depositing a body in the bog wasn't just disposal, it was a direct line to the divine. Some scholars think the violence was symbolic, mirroring myths of gods who died and were reborn. Others point to the body's placement near tribal boundaries, suggesting they were guardians, their spirits protecting the land. But the bogs aren't the only natural preservers of the dead. In the Andes, the dry, cold air of the Atacama Desert mummified the Chinchorro people's dead as early as 5000 BC, 2 millennia before Egypt's first mummies. Unlike the Egyptians, the Chinchorro didn't remove organs. They reinforced bodies with sticks and reeds, covered them in clay masks, and painted them in vibrant ochre or manganese black. The result, mummies with grinning, almost theatrical expressions, some so well preserved their fingerprints are still visible. From the peat's embrace to the desert's breath, these cultures turned the elements into collaborators, letting earth and air sculpt their farewells. And as we'll see, some societies took preservation even further, not with nature's help but with sheer human ingenuity. Long before the pyramids cast shadows over the Nile, along the stark coastline of what's now Chile and Peru, the Chinchorro people were perfecting the art of eternal preservation. Their mummies, dating back as early as 5000 BC, aren't just older than Egypt's, they rewrite the story of death rituals entirely. Picture this, an entire community, from elders to infants, carefully disassembled and reassembled like sacred dolls, their skin replaced with clay, their bodies reinforced with sticks and reeds, their faces painted in vivid blacks and reds. These weren't just burials, they were rebirths, a defiant refusal to let death erase identity. What sets the Chinchorro apart isn't just their timeline, it's their inclusivity. While Egyptian mummification was reserved for elites who could afford its costly rituals, the Chinchorro practiced what scholars call democratic death. A fisherman received the same meticulous treatment as a village leader. Even the tiniest infants, some no older than a few days, were transformed into miniature masterpieces, their delicate features preserved under clay masks with hauntingly serene expressions. In one striking example, a child's mummy was adorned with a wig of human hair, the strands still intact after millennia, a parent's last act of tenderness frozen in time. The process itself was astonishingly complex. Bodies were gutted, their organs removed through incisions, and the skeletons stabilized with wooden splints or bundles of reeds. The skin, often peeled away like a glove, was later reattached or replaced with a mixture of ash, clay, and seawater, sculpted into lifelike contours. The final touch, a coat of vibrant paint, manganese black for depth, ochre red for vitality, as if to mock death's pallor. Some mummies even had their mouths stretched into subtle smiles, their eyes outlined to appear forever watchful. This wasn't just preservation, it was performance art, a way to keep the dead present among the living. But why go to such lengths? The harsh desert environment, where water was scarce and decay slow, might have inspired the practice. Yet the Chinchorro's mummies revealed deeper beliefs. Unlike cultures that hid their dead underground, the Chinchorro often kept mummies in homes or displayed them during rituals, as if death hadn't severed social bonds. Some show signs of repeated repainting, suggesting they were curated for generations, their presence a bridge between past and present. This tradition echoes in other early cultures, though none quite like the Chinchorro. In the Canary Islands, the Guanches mummified their dead using techniques eerily similar to Egypt's, despite having no known contact. In the Aleutian Islands, indigenous peoples created shrunken mummies by eviscerating bodies and drying them in caves. Each method reflects a unique dialogue between environment and belief, proof that humanity's obsession with cheating decay is as old as mortality itself. The Chinchorro's legacy crumbles into dust today, their mummies threatened by climate change and looting. But in their fragile forms, we see a radical idea that every life, no matter how brief or humble, deserves to be remembered. They didn't build pyramids, but in their own way, they conquered time. And as we'll discover next, some cultures took that conquest even further, not with preservation, but with transformation, turning bones into art and graves into galleries. Deep beneath the rolling hills of China's Shaanxi province lies an empire frozen in clay, a silent legion of over 8,000 soldiers, each one a masterpiece of individuality, standing guard for eternity. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unite China, didn't just want a tomb, he demanded an entire underworld army, crafted with such precision that no two faces are alike. Archaeologists have found warriors with high cheekbones, furrowed brows, even subtle smiles, some with the coiled tension of seasoned fighters, others with the calm of veterans. Their armor, etched in stone, reflects ranks from archers to generals, their hands once gripping real bronze weapons, now long looted, but the most astonishing detail. These statues weren't mass-produced. Artisans signed their work, competing to outdo one another under the emperor's ruthless deadline. The scale is staggering. Spread across 3 massive pits, the Terracotta army includes not just infantry but cavalry, chariots, and even a secret command post with high-ranking officers. Yet this is just the periphery. The emperor's central tomb, sealed under a man-made mountain, remains untouched, its contents protected by legends of booby traps, rivers of liquid mercury, crossbows rigged to fire at intruders. Modern scans reveal underground chambers swirling with mercury vapor, suggesting ancient accounts of 100 rivers and the sea, mapped in quicksilver, might not be myth. Qin Shi Huang's obsession with immortality reshaped burial customs forever. Earlier Chinese nobles were buried with wooden or bronze figurines, but he escalated it to a staggering art form, blending military might with artistic genius. His terracotta soldiers weren't just guardians, they were a declaration. In death, as in life, he would command loyalty, his authority unchallenged even by the gods. But he wasn't alone in his ambition. Centuries later, Japan's Kofun-era rulers buried their dead in massive keyhole-shaped mounds surrounded by Haniwa clay figurines of warriors, dancers, and horses, though simpler in design. In Mesopotamia, the royal cemetery of held soldiers and servants entombed with their king, their skeletons still holding cups of poison. Even Europe had its echoes. The Thracians buried chieftains with gold masks and sacrificed horses, their graves echoing with the clatter of phantom hooves. What unites these traditions is more than vanity. It's the unshakable belief that power transcends death. The Terracotta army, with its silent ranks, reminds us that for some rulers, the afterlife wasn't a peaceful retreat but another battlefield. And as we'll see, not all eternal guardians were made of clay. Some were far more unexpected. High on the rocky hills outside ancient Persepolis, the Zoroastrians built their towers of silence, looming stone circles where the dead weren't buried or burned, but laid bare to the sky. To modern eyes, it might seem stark, even shocking, but for followers of Zarathustra, this was the ultimate act of reverence. They believed earth and fire were sacred elements, too pure to be defiled by decay. Instead, they entrusted their loved ones to the sun and to scavenging birds, creatures they saw as nature's perfect cleaners. Vultures would descend, stripping flesh from bone in hours, leaving behind only sun-bleached skeletons that temple attendants would later gather into ossuaries. It wasn't abandonment, it was transformation, a return to the cycle without poisoning the elements they worshipped. The ritual's precision mirrored Zoroastrianism's core tenets. Bodies were carried by special pallbearers called nacelers, who wore cloth masks to avoid contaminating the air with their breath. The towers themselves were engineered with concentric rings, men on the outer circle, women in the middle, children at the center, each layer a reflection of societal structure persisting even in death. After the bones were collected, they'd be placed in lime-filled pits, dissolving slowly until nothing remained but dust. No mourning was allowed near the towers. Grief was considered a private matter, separate from the sacred work of purification. This practice wasn't just about theology, it was ecological wisdom centuries ahead of its time. In Persia's arid climate, burial risked contaminating scarce groundwater, while cremation wasted precious fuel. The Towers of Silence solved both problems, turning mortality into sustainability. Remarkably, similar logic appears in modern green burials, where biodegradable shrouds replace caskets and forests grow atop remains. The Zoroastrians understood something we're only now rediscovering. Death doesn't have to burden the living world, yet not all cultures shared this view of elemental purity. Just across the Mediterranean, the Vikings sent their dead to sea on flaming ships, embracing fire's destructive power as a gateway to the divine. Meanwhile, in India's Varanasi, Hindus still cremate bodies by the Ganges, believing the river's sacred waters carry souls to liberation. The diversity is staggering. Some faiths entombed bodies to await resurrection. Others dissolved them in quicklime to hasten the soul's journey. But perhaps none blur the line between ritual and ecology, quite like the ancient practice of lake burials, where the water itself became a living tomb. Imagine a canoe gliding across a misty alpine lake, its passenger lying still, wrapped in deerskin and weighted with stones. As it reaches the deepest point, the boat tips and the body sinks into the cold embrace of the water. For the Bronze Age people of Europe's lakeside villages, this wasn't tragedy, it was homecoming. Dozens of these bog bodies without the bog have been pulled from lakes from Ireland to Slovenia, their bones astonishingly preserved in the oxygen-poor depths. Some show signs of violent deaths, perhaps sacrifices to water deities, while others seem to have been carefully arranged, as if the lake were a divine caretaker. The water burial symbolism flowed in two directions. For coastal communities, surrendering the dead to the waves honored the sea's generosity, ensuring continued bounty from fishing grounds. Inland lakes were often seen as portals to the underworld, their still surfaces masking unseen realms. The Maori of New Zealand sometimes placed the dead in hollowed-out trees at water's edge, letting the tides carry them away, while the Haida of the Pacific Northwest anchored coffins in sea caves, where the rhythm of the waves became a perpetual lullaby. What unites these rituals, whether atop towers, in flames, or beneath waves, is the conviction that how we treat the dead reflects how we value the living world. The Zoroastrians didn't just avoid polluting earth and fire, they celebrated the creatures that completed the cycle. The lake dwellers didn't hide from death's inevitability, they entrusted it to the waters that sustained them. In an age of concrete cemeteries and embalming fluids, these ancient practices whisper a challenge. Can we honor our dead without harming the world they left behind? The vast Pacific Ocean wasn't just a highway for Polynesian navigators, it was a sacred road to the afterlife. When a chief or revered elder died, some island communities didn't bury them in the earth. They built tiny canoes, carefully placed the body inside, and set it adrift on the currents. These weren't haphazard rafts but intricately crafted vessels, sometimes equipped with miniature sails, laden with offerings like taro, fishhooks, and even prized shell jewelry. The logic was beautiful in its simplicity. If the ocean had sustained them in life, why wouldn't it guide them in death? This practice wasn't about abandonment. Families would watch from shore as the canoe shrank into the horizon, believing the trade winds, the same ones that brought their ancestors to the islands, would now carry their loved ones to Hawaii, the mythical homeland. Some canoes were even weighted to sink after days at sea, a symbolic descent into the underworld. Archaeologists have found evidence of these rituals from Tahiti to the Marquesas, where oral histories describe entire fleets of spirit canoes launched during times of famine or war, as if sending messengers to the gods for help. Water burials took strikingly similar forms across the globe. The Haida of the Pacific Northwest carved mortuary poles topped with hollowed-out cedar boxes, placing chiefs inside to face the sea they once ruled. In medieval Europe, Norse sagas tell of kings laid on ships piled with treasure, set aflame and pushed offshore, a spectacle of smoke and sparks against the twilight. Even the ancient Egyptians, though best known for desert tombs, buried their dead with model boats to navigate the celestial Nile in the afterlife. But perhaps the most poignant parallel comes from the Ganges River, where Hindu rituals still unfold daily. Here, ashes are scattered into the water, believed to break the cycle of rebirth. Unlike the Polynesian solitary canoes, the Ganges ceremonies are communal, with families wading into the shallows to release their loved ones into the same currents that cradle pilgrims and fishermen. Both traditions share a profound trust in water's power to cleanse, carry, and transform. The Polynesian canoe burials reveal something deeper than ceremony. They mirror an entire worldview. To a culture that navigated thousands of miles by stars and wave patterns, death was just another voyage, one requiring the same skills and tools as any other journey. The offerings weren't arbitrary, they were survival kits for the soul. A fishhook for sustenance, a paddle for direction, a woven mat for rest. Every item whispered the same hope, that the departed wouldn't just disappear but arrive somewhere. Modern science has even given these rituals an unexpected twist. Oceanographers now understand that Pacific currents move in predictable loops, meaning some of those canoes might have circled back to their home islands months later, bones cradled in the hull like a final homecoming. Whether by accident or design, the ocean honored the ritual in its own way, closing the circle between the living and the dead. From the Pacific's endless blue to the Ganges' sacred flow, these water burials remind us that humanity's relationship with death is as fluid as the elements themselves. And as we'll see next, some cultures took this idea even further, not just using water, but transforming the body into something entirely new. Tucked away in the limestone caves of the Philippines, ancient burial jars tell a story of reverence and reunion. These aren't ordinary pots. Some stand taller than a person, their bellies wide enough to cradle multiple skeletons curled together like sleeping children. The Manungol jar, discovered in Palawan's Taban caves, is a masterpiece of both craftsmanship and symbolism. Its lid features two figures paddling a boat, their eyes hollow yet purposeful, their vessel carved with waves that seem to ripple even in stone. To the ancestors who placed their dead inside, this wasn't just decoration, it was a map. The boat represented the soul's journey across turbulent waters to the afterlife, a belief so deeply held that some jars were even buried with miniature paddles as tools for the voyage. What's striking is how these burials blurred the line between home and tomb. Many jars were nestled beneath house floors, keeping the dead physically close to the living, a practice echoing the Filipino value of familial bonds transcending death. Others were stacked in caves like sacred pantry items, their openings sealed with clay or leaves to protect the contents. Some jars held not just bones but treasures, shell bracelets, clay lamps, even tiny gold ornaments, suggesting the dead might need wealth in the next world. Forensic studies reveal even more intimacy. Certain jars contain skeletons arranged as if embracing, their bones intertwined across centuries. This tradition wasn't unique to the Philippines. Across Southeast Asia, cultures turned ceramics into coffins. In Vietnam's Sa-Hu-1E-F3NH culture, burial jars were often topped with soul hats, miniature clay lids shaped like roofs, as if the dead needed shelter. The Toraja people of Indonesia carved Tau-Tau effigies to watch over cliffside tombs, their wooden faces painted to resemble the departed. But the Manungol jar stands apart for its artistry. The boatman's serene expressions suggest not fear of death, but acceptance, a community at peace with the tides of existence. The jars also hint at a startling practicality. In tropical climates where soil could flood or erode, caves and ceramic vessels offered dry, secure resting places. Some anthropologists believe the multiple burials weren't just symbolic but logistical, allowing generations to share space in death as they had in life. Modern echoes linger in the Philippines, hanging coffins of Sagada, where cliffs still cradle the dead above the earth, and in the widespread practice of keeping ancestral ashes in homes today. From these quiet caves, we voyage south to a ritual where death wasn't hidden but displayed, a celebration etched in towering stone. On the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, the Toraja people built entire villages for the departed, their cliffside tombs guarded by lifelike effigies that gaze across the valleys below. For the Maori of New Zealand, death wasn't an ending, it was a homecoming to the ancestors. Their burial grounds, known as Yorupa, were more than cemeteries. They were tapu, or sacred spaces, where the living and the dead maintained an unbroken connection. Picture a hillside dotted with intricately carved wooden posts called tuahu, their swirling patterns telling stories of lineage and legacy. These markers weren't just memorials, they were gateways guiding spirits back to Hawaii, the ancestral homeland across the sea. But for high-ranking chiefs, the rituals went deeper. Their bodies were often hidden in secluded caves or forest clearings, locations known only to a trusted few. This secrecy wasn't about fear, it was about protecting their mana, the spiritual power that could linger long after death. The funeral ceremonies themselves were a symphony of emotion. Elders delivered stirring speeches, their words weaving the departed's deeds into the tribe's collective memory. Wayata, or songs, rose and fell like the tides, some sorrowful, others defiantly joyful. And then came the Hakari, the feast, where grief and celebration collided over shared food. Mourners might weep one moment and laugh the next, recalling the deceased's quirks or heroic exploits. This duality reflected a core Maori belief. Death wasn't something to be feared, but a natural step in the journey of Wakapapa, the interconnected web of generations. Similar practices echo across the indigenous cultures of the Americas. The Haida of the Pacific Northwest, for instance, placed their dead in mortuary poles, towering cedar sentinels carved with crests symbolizing clan identity. Like the Maori, they believed the deceased spirit remained nearby, watching over the community. Farther south, the Mapuche of Chile buried their loved ones in mounds called Kemamul, topped with wooden statues depicting the departed's face. These figures weren't just artistic tributes, they were conduits, allowing the living to speak to the dead through prayers and offerings. What unites these traditions is the idea that burial grounds are living spaces, charged with energy and memory. The Maori Yoruba, the Haida poles, the Mapuche mounds all reject the notion that graves are places of finality. Instead, they're thresholds where the past and present continually converse. And as we'll see next, some cultures took this idea even further, turning entire landscapes into memorials so vast they could be seen from the heavens. In the arid valleys of what is now New Mexico, the Mimbres people turned pottery into poetry, funerary bowls so personal they seemed to breathe. Each vessel, painted in stark black on white designs, bore the likeness of the deceased, a hunter with his bow, a woman grinding corn, even children mid-laugh, their features captured with startling intimacy. But these weren't just portraits, they were doors. Before burial, a small hole, the kill hole, was punched through the center, not as violence but as liberation. The Mimbres believed this act freed the spirit, allowing it to ascend while the bowl itself remained as a testament to the life lived. The scenes on these vessels reveal a culture deeply entwined with both the mundane and the magical. Some depict rabbits caught in snares or fields of ripening squash, echoing the daily rhythms of Pueblo life. Others show mythic figures, horned serpents or dancing cachinas, bridging the human and divine. One remarkable bowl portrays a man transformed into a deer, his limbs elongating into graceful legs mid-stride, as if capturing the moment his soul crossed into the spirit world. These weren't mere decorations, they were narratives, ensuring the dead wouldn't be forgotten and their stories wouldn't end with their last breath. The Mimbres weren't alone in merging art and eternity. Half a world away, the Etruscans sculpted terracotta sarcophagi with couples reclining as if at a banquet, their faces animated with smiles, their hands forever clasped. In Nigeria, the ancient Nok culture buried their dead with expressive clay heads, their pierced eyes and coiled hairstyles defying time's erasure. Even the Gauls of Iron Age Europe tucked small metal figurines into graves, miniature warriors or animals meant to serve the departed in the afterlife. What unites these traditions is the universal impulse to defy anonymity. A name might fade, a tombstone crumble, but art endures. The Mimbres bowls with their kill holes remind us that creativity and mortality have always been intertwined, one capturing what the other cannot hold. And as we'll see next, some cultures took this idea even further, weaving the dead into the very fabric of their homes. Among the most debated burial rituals in history is the practice of sati, a tradition where Hindu widows would ascend their husband's funeral pyre, choosing to join him in death rather than face life alone. To modern eyes, it's a shocking act, but in its historical context, it was framed as the ultimate expression of wifely devotion, a sacred duty that transcended mortal fear. The flames were said to purify both souls, binding them together for eternity. Yet beneath the spiritual ideal lay layers of coercion, societal pressure, and complex debates about autonomy. While some accounts describe widows stepping forward willingly, others reveal families forcing the act, tying women to the pyre or drugging them into compliance. By the early 19th century, British colonial rulers and Indian reformers like Roger Ram Mohan Roy campaigned fiercely against sati, branding it not as piety but as gendered violence disguised as tradition. The practice wasn't universally accepted even in its time. Ancient Hindu texts like the Rig Veda mention widows remarrying, suggesting sati emerged later as a regional custom, not a doctrinal requirement. Some communities revered sati as heroic, building stone memorials called sati stones, carved with the woman's image, her hands folded in prayer. Others quietly discouraged it, offering widows' roles as spiritual ascetics instead. What's undeniable is how sati mirrored broader anxieties about female independence. A widow's unchecked presence was seen by some as disruptive, even dangerous. Parallels to sati's intensity appear globally, though rarely with fire. In ancient China, widows of the elite were sometimes buried alive beside their husbands, their tombs stocked with household goods for the afterlife. The Inca occasionally selected young women as aklas to be sacrificed upon a king's death, their lives offered as spiritual companions, yet other cultures took starkly different approaches. The Spartans expected widows to remarry swiftly, prioritizing population growth over perpetual mourning. Norse sagas celebrated widows who managed estates or led armies, their status elevated, not erased by loss. Perhaps the most poignant contrast comes from the Akan people of Ghana, where widowhood rituals centered on community, not isolation. A newly widowed woman would be ritually washed, then surrounded by female kin who sang, fed her, and slowly reintegrated her into daily life. Death ended a marriage, but not a woman's place in the world. This divergence between self-annihilation and resilience reveals how deeply culture shapes grief. Sati's legacy lingers in modern India as a cautionary tale, its rare, illegal recurrences met with outrage. Yet it also raises uncomfortable questions. How many rituals, ancient or modern, demand sacrifice under the guise of love? And who gets to decide when devotion crosses into oppression? These questions shadow not just sati, but countless burial traditions where the line between choice and coercion blurs. Our next ritual offers a stark counterpoint, a celebration of partnership that didn't demand destruction, but preserved love in stone. High in the Andes, the Chinchoro Mummies reveal couples buried side by side, their hands clasped across centuries, their faces turned toward one another as if in quiet conversation. Here, death wasn't an end, but a continuation, a bond too tender to sever. The Etruscans carved eternity into stone, their tombs not just resting places but celebrations of love that refused to end. In the sprawling necropolises of Tarquinia and Servitory, couples lie together on sarcophagi sculpted with uncanny intimacy, husbands and wives reclining side by side, their faces animated with faint smiles, their hands forever touching. The terracotta figures seem caught mid-conversation, as if death were merely a pause between shared meals. Surrounding them, tomb walls burst with frescoes of music and dance, banquets where the living and dead mingled in perpetual festivity. This wasn't mere memorialization, it was a declaration that marriage transcended even the grave. What makes these burials extraordinary is their defiance of contemporary norms. While Greeks and Romans often idealized solitary heroes, the Etruscans elevated partnership. One sarcophagus from the 6th century BCE shows a woman leaning against her husband, her arm draped casually over his shoulder, a posture so modern it feels timeless. Archaeologists note how often Etruscan women are depicted as equals in these scenes, holding drinking cups or wearing finely detailed jewelry, their status preserved in death as in life. Some tombs even include inscriptions where spouses address each other by tender nicknames, their voices echoing across millennia. But the Etruscans weren't alone in binding souls beyond death. In Peru's Moch culture, nobles were sometimes buried with their consorts, though the context was darker. Analysis of skeletal remains suggests some companions were sacrificed to accompany rulers. Meanwhile, in Mongolia's Altai Mountains, Scythian Kurgan tombs reveal couples buried with matching gold torques, their skeletons still adorned with tattoos that mirrored each other's patterns. Even the Vikings, for all their warrior ethos, occasionally buried husbands and wives in the same ship, their weapons and brooches mingled in the hold. The most haunting parallel comes from Ukraine's Tripilia culture, where dual burials show skeletons curled face to face, their bones arranged as if in embrace. Unlike the Etruscan celebratory feasts, these graves whisper of quiet devotion, a choice to face eternity eye to eye. Yet both traditions share a profound truth: love was worth carrying into the unknown. As we turn to the next ritual, the bonds between the dead take a different form, not just pairs, but entire communities woven together in death. High in the Andes, the Chinchoro Mummies reveal groups carefully arranged in familial clusters, their painted faces turned toward one another, their hands linked by strands of woven reeds. Here, death wasn't a solitary journey but a collective voyage, each soul anchored to the others. 16th ritual, the mass graves of the plague during the Black Death. Europe resorted to mass burials, stacking bodies in pits with quicklime. These grim sights, like London's East Smithfield, show how pandemics disrupt traditions, yet some still placed coins or tokens with the dead, clinging to ritual amid chaos. How did other societies handle epidemic burials? The next ritual confronts mortality on a grand scale. The Black Death didn't just kill, it shattered the very rituals that gave death meaning. In London's East Smithfield Cemetery, hastily dug trenches held hundreds of bodies stacked like firewood, their layers separated by quicklime to hasten decay and mask the stench. Archaeologists found mothers cradling children, lovers side by side, their bones fused by time and chemicals, but amid the horror, glimmers of humanity persisted. A coin tucked into a palm, a pilgrim's badge on a chest, small acts of defiance against the anonymity of mass death. These weren't careless burials, they were the best a broken world could offer. Other societies faced similar crises with startlingly different solutions. When smallpox ravaged the Americas, some indigenous tribes abandoned traditional cremations, fearing the smoke would spread disease. Instead, they wrapped bodies in bark or hides, suspending them from trees or placing them in remote caves. The Lakota spoke of keeping death at a distance, a temporary measure until the land could heal. In Constantinople, Byzantine citizens threw plague victims into the sea, weighted with stones, trusting the currents to carry contamination away. Even the Mongols, who typically exposed their dead to the elements, burned entire camps after outbreaks, the flames purifying what Earth couldn't safely hold. What unites these responses isn't just desperation, it's improvisation. The Aztecs, devastated by Cocoliztli in the 16th century, repurposed their sacred cenotes as mass graves, submerging bodies in the same sinkholes once reserved for offerings to the rain god Tlaloc. In Venice, the dead were ferried to the island of Lazaretto Vecchio, where lime-soaked shrouds and brick-lined pits turned quarantine into a macabre science. Each culture, stripped of its usual rites, invented new ways to honor the dead while protecting the living, Yet even in chaos, some traditions refused to die. During London's Great Plague of 1665, a few families risked infection to bury loved ones at night, whispering prayers as they dropped shrouded bodies into pits. In Mumbai's 19th century cholera epidemics, Parsis continued their sky burials, though they built higher walls around their towers of silence to calm public fears. The irony was cruel. The very rituals meant to comfort the living became threats, yet abandoning them felt like a second death. These mass graves are more than historical footnotes, they're mirrors. The COVID-19 pandemic saw New York's Hart Island reclaim its role as a potter's field, drones capturing trenches of plain pine boxes. Modern or medieval, the lesson is the same. When death outpaces ceremony, we still find ways to say, "You mattered." The coins in East Smithfield, the folded hands in Venetian lazarettos, they whisper that even in collapse, humanity clings to dignity. Our next ritual takes us from plague pits to something even more unsettling. Catacombs where bones became art, and the line between memorial and macabre blurred beyond recognition. Deep in the Amazon, where the canopy swallows sunlight and roots twist like serpents, death wasn't hidden, it was returned. The Yanomami people didn't bury their dead beneath stone or soil. They entrusted them to the forest itself. Corpses, carefully wrapped in layers of fragrant leaves, were placed high in the forks of kapok trees or suspended on woven platforms, left to the care of wind, rain, and scavengers. This wasn't neglect, it was the ultimate act of balance. The Yanomami believed speaking the deceased's name could summon their spirit back, so silence became their mourning language. No graves to visit, no markers to tend, just the quiet surrender of flesh to the ecosystem that had sustained it. This practice wasn't unique. Along the Amazon's sprawling tributaries, the Satare Mawe built canoe graves, hollowing out tree trunks to cradle bodies before setting them afloat on rivers, their final voyage mirroring the ceaseless flow of water. Meanwhile, the Weri people practiced endocannibalism not out of brutality but communion. By consuming small portions of their loved ones' remains, they believed the deceased's essence would live on in the community. Though starkly different from tree burials, both rituals shared a core philosophy. Death wasn't an erasure, but a redistribution of energy back into the world that birthed it. The rainforest's rhythms shaped these traditions. In a land where decay is swift and the earth endlessly shifts, tombs would drown in mud or be swallowed by roots. Trees, however, stood as steadfast guardians. The Tupi people of Brazil carved canoes from single trunks, using them as coffins before releasing them downstream, a symbolic journey to the land without evil, their ancestral paradise. Even today, some tribes whisper that the rustling leaves at dusk are the voices of the dead, now woven into the forest's breath. Contrast this with the Dani people of New Guinea's highlands, who mummified their chiefs with smoke and pig grease, seating them in cliffside niches to watch over villages. Both cultures revered their dead, but where the Dani sought to preserve, the Yanomami released. One fought time's passage, the other embraced it. Yet both understood something modern societies often forget. How we treat the dead reflects how we value the land that sustains us. As we leave the forest floor, our next ritual ascends to the clouds literally. High in the Andes, the Chachapoya people built their tombs into sheer cliffs, their dead perched above the world like sentinels of stone. High in the sun-baked cliffs of the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones carved their dead into the very bones of the earth. These weren't simple graves tucked into alcoves, they were fortresses of eternity, perched where only the brave or the desperate would dare to climb. Imagine a burial party scaling sheer rock faces with ropes, their hands gripping weathered sandstone as they hoisted bundles of woven yucca fiber, each containing a body curled in the fetal position, its belongings carefully arranged beside it, turquoise beads, feather blankets, clay jars still sticky with last meals of cornmeal and juniper berries. The effort was staggering, but the message was clear. Death deserved a place beyond the reach of wolves, thieves, and time itself. What's striking is how these cliff tombs mirrored the Puebloans' daily lives. Their villages, like Mesa Verde's cliff palace, clung to the same impossible heights, their ladders pulled up at night for safety. In death as in life, elevation meant protection, but also something more. The ancestral Puebloans saw the sky as a realm of spirits, and placing the dead among the clouds brought them closer to the rain gods who governed their parched world. Some tombs align with celestial events. Winter solstice sunlight still pierces certain crevices, illuminating skulls placed deliberately in the path of the beams. The dead weren't just stored, they were positioned as intermediaries between the living and the divine. This reverence for height echoes across continents. In the Philippines' Sagada region, the Igorot people suspended coffins from limestone cliffs, the wood weathering to silver as generations passed. The ancient Canary Islanders entombed their kings in volcanic caves high on Mount Tade, believing the peak's snow-capped summit touched the afterlife. Even the Scythians of the Eurasian steppe piled earth into towering kurgans, their chieftains buried with golden armor at the summit, as if to declare their dominance would last beyond death. Yet the Puebloans' cliff tombs hold a unique intimacy. Unlike the grand pyramids of Egypt or the sprawling mausoleums of Rome, these were small, familial spaces. Archaeologists have found mothers buried with infants cradled against them, or clusters of skeletons with matching dental patterns, entire generations resting together in the rock. The care taken in their placement suggests ongoing connection. Some sites show evidence of revisitation, with offerings of fresh pottery or maize left decades after the initial burial. For the Puebloans, death wasn't a single event, but a relationship that endured as long as the cliffs themselves. Modern Pueblo tribes still speak of these sites with quiet reverence, though many now keep their locations secret to deter looters. The silence surrounding them feels fitting, a return to the sacred secrecy their ancestors valued. And as we look up to the next ritual, we find a culture that took this celestial ambition even further, building not just for the sky, but for the stars themselves. The Maya, with their pyramid tombs piercing the jungle canopy, turned death into a cosmic equation, their rulers' bones aligned with the Milky Way's shimmering path. The roar of a Viking funeral pyre wasn't just a farewell, it was a portal. When flames consumed a warrior's body, licking at his sword and shield, his family didn't weep for loss, they sang for passage. The smoke, thick with the scent of burning oak and sacrificed livestock, carried his essence upward to Valhalla, where Odin's ravens would guide him to the feasting hall. Archaeologists have unearthed these pyre sites across Scandinavia, the earth still stained with charcoal and melted glass from beads that once adorned the dead. In one Danish mound, the remains of a chieftain lay surrounded by the ashen bones of his hunting dogs, their loyalty enduring even the fire's hunger. Cremation wasn't merely practical for the Vikings, it was alchemy. Fire transformed flesh into something sacred, purging mortal weakness and leaving behind only what the gods would recognize. A warrior's sword, twisted by heat, became a symbol of his spirit's resilience. The charred fragments of a woman's brooch hinted at her status, the gold alloy surviving where lesser metals vanished. Even the pyre's geometry held meaning. Some mounds reveal circular ash patterns, echoing the Norse belief in cyclical rebirth, while others form longboats of embers, their prows pointing westward toward the mythical lands of the dead. But the Vikings weren't alone in their fiery farewells. Half a world away, the Hindus of Varanasi still cremate bodies by the Ganges, believing the river's sacred waters dissolve karma and release the soul. Unlike the Norse, who saw flames as a bridge to battle, Hindu tradition views fire as a gentle dissolver, the god Agni consuming the body so the spirit can slip free. In ancient Rome, cremation was so widespread that columbaria, vaults for urns, lined the roads into cities. The Japanese practice of kotswage, where families use chopsticks to pluck bone fragments from ashes, turns mourning into an act of intimate care. Perhaps the most striking contrast comes from the Parsis of Mumbai, who consider fire too sacred to defile with corpses. Instead, they expose bodies to the sun and vultures at the Towers of Silence, a ritual that shares the Vikings' pragmatism but rejects their flames. Both cultures, though, understood this truth. Death demands transformation. Whether by fire, beak, or wave, the body must change form to free the soul. The legacy of these pyres lingers in unexpected places. Modern forensic studies reveal how Viking cremations reached temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to fracture teeth and warp steel. Yet amid the devastation, tiny details endure. A child's milk tooth spared by the flames, a charred hazelnut from a final meal. These fragments whisper that even in annihilation, something persists. And as we turn to the next ritual, we find a culture that took preservation to its zenith, defying fire entirely. The Chinchoro Mummies, with their clay-coated skin and painted smiles, refused to surrender to decay or flame, their bodies made eternal by human hands. Beneath the quiet streets of modern Malta lies a world where death wasn't silenced, it was amplified. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a 3,000-year-old underground labyrinth, isn't just a burial site, it's a cathedral of echoes. Carved from solid limestone by a prehistoric culture lost to time, its chambers spiral 3 stories deep, their walls pocked with thousands of burial niches like the cells of a colossal hive. But what's most astonishing isn't the bones, though archaeologists have found remnants of over 7,000 individuals, it's the acoustics. Certain chambers resonate at frequencies that transform whispers into thunder, a single drumbeat into a rolling wave of sound. Stand in the so-called oracle room and hum, and the vibrations ripple through your ribs as if the stone itself is singing. This was no accident. The builders engineered these spaces so precisely that modern sound engineers still marvel at them, suggesting rituals where chanting or rhythmic drumming could induce trance states, blurring the line between the living and the dead. Then there are the skulls, some carefully unearthed from the deepest chambers, bear bizarre elongation, their craniums stretched unnaturally upward, like flickering candle flames. Were these signs of elite status, genetic quirks, or something more unsettling? Without written records, we're left with theories. Some scholars suggest head binding in infancy, a practice seen in other ancient cultures to denote nobility. Others point to the Hypogeum's artistic depictions of figures with similar silhouettes, their elongated heads carved into the walls like ghostly sentinels. Whatever the truth, these skulls whisper of a society where death and distortion intertwined, where the boundary between the human and the divine was literally reshaped. The Hypogeum's design deepens the mystery. Its 3 levels mirror the layers of the underworld in many ancient cosmologies, the upper realm for the newly departed, the middle for purification, the deepest for eternal rest. Paintings of red ochre spirals, reminiscent of the cycles of life and death, still cling to the ceilings, but it's the so-called sleeping lady, a tiny clay figurine found curled in one niche, that haunts the imagination. Her pose isn't one of grief, but repose, as if death were merely a nap in the earth's embrace. Cave burials like these weren't unique to Malta. In Crete's Minoan tombs, bodies were laid in caves with seashells and ceramic bulls, their walls painted with dolphins leaping through azure waves. The Maya of Belize placed their dead in sacred cenotes, where stalactites dripped like stone tears onto jade-adorned skeletons. Even France's Lascaux caves, famed for their Paleolithic art, show evidence of burials where the dead rested beneath galleries of bison and horses, as if art and afterlife were inseparable. What unites these subterranean sanctuaries is their refusal to let death be invisible. The hypogeum's architects didn't hide their dead. They orchestrated their passage with sound, symbol, and stone. In these echoing chambers, mourning wasn't silent, it was a chorus, reverberating long after the last breath. And as we descend deeper into the earth's secrets, we find a culture that turned caves into canvases, painting their dead not with ochre, but with light itself. The peat bogs of Ireland hold secrets darker than their murky waters. When turf cutters in 1951 uncovered the perfectly preserved body of a young man near the village of Gallog, his leather cape still draped over his shoulders and a willow rod twisted around his neck, they'd stumbled upon more than a corpse, they'd found a riddle. Like Tollund Man and Gråbell Man across the North Sea, Ireland's bog bodies bear the marks of calculated violence. Clonacabhan Man, his hair stiff with imported pine resin gel, suffered axe blows so brutal they split his skull. Old Croghan Man, his torso found without limbs, shows stab wounds and a deep chest incision that may have held his severed arms. These weren't careless murders. They were rituals frozen in time by the bog's tannin-rich embrace. What sets Ireland's sacrifices apart are the tantalizing clues to their identities. Old Croghan Man stood over 6 feet tall, a giant for his time, with manicured hands showing no signs of labor. His last meal, a gruel made from barley and buttermilk, eaten hours before death. Was he a deposed king, his dismemberment symbolizing the fracturing of his rule? Or a sacred offering to the fertility goddess Eerie, whose name gives Ireland its Gaelic title, Eire? The Celts believed bogs were thresholds to the otherworld, places where the veil between realms grew thin. Depositing a life into that liminal space might have been the ultimate bargain, a human plea for abundant harvests or victory in battle. Yet not all Celtic death rites were so grim. In Wales and Cornwall, circular stone cairns held cremated remains alongside seashells and polished quartz, suggesting journeys guided by starlight. The Gauls of ancient France buried their nobles under massive mounds with chariots and cauldrons for feasting in the afterlife. Most striking are the bone caves of Scotland's Outer Hebrides, where skeletons were carefully disarticulated and sorted. Skulls in one niche, femurs in another, a practice some scholars interpret as symbolic rebirth, the body rearranged like puzzle pieces awaiting resurrection. The contrast between Ireland's brutal bog sacrifices and these orderly reburials reveals the Celts' dual view of death, as a moment of violence that could appease the gods and as a cyclical return to beginnings. Perhaps what unites them is the belief that the dead didn't vanish, they transformed, becoming intermediaries between the living and the forces that govern their world. And as we leave the bogs behind, we find a culture that took transformation to its most dazzling extreme, turning death into a blaze of gold and glory. The Scythians of the Eurasian steppe buried their kings in tombs so lavish, even the horses wore armor. The pyramids of Mesoamerica didn't just house the dead, they launched them into the cosmos. When King Pakal of Palenque was laid to rest in his sarcophagus beneath the Temple of Inscriptions, his body was transformed into a celestial traveler. His jade mask with its obsidian eyes staring eternally upward wasn't just decoration, it was armor for the soul, designed to protect him on his journey through the 9 layers of Xibalba, the Maya underworld. The lid of his sarcophagus tells the story in exquisite detail. Pakal tumbles down the world tree, his body arched like a diver breaching the surface between realms, surrounded by glyphs mapping the path to resurrection. This wasn't a tomb, it was a launch pad, but Pakal wasn't alone in his pyramid. Beneath the temple's staircases, archaeologists found the remains of 6 sacrificed companions, likely servants or warriors, sealed in separate chambers. Their bones, arranged with care, suggest they weren't just offerings but spiritual escorts, armed with pottery and weapons to serve their king in the afterlife. The Maya saw death as a collective endeavor where status demanded an entourage. Even the pyramid itself was part of the ritual. Built with precisely calculated vents and shafts, it channeled rainwater through hidden passages, creating echoes that mimicked the voices of ancestors during ceremonies. When priests climbed its steps to perform rites, they weren't just honoring the dead, they were walking a bridge between worlds. The Aztecs took this concept even further. At Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, rulers were buried with sacrifices numbering in the hundreds. One deposit contained the skulls of 42 children, their bones arranged in a circle, a grisly plea to Tlaloc, the rain god for agricultural abundance. Another held the remains of a jaguar dressed in warrior's regalia, its claws clutching a sacrificial knife. These weren't random acts of violence, they were meticulously staged theater where death fueled the cosmic order. The pyramid's layers mirrored the Aztec universe, the earthly realm at its base, the celestial heights at its summit, and the underworld humming beneath its foundations. Pyramid burials weren't unique to Mesoamerica. In Sudan, the Nubians built steeper, narrower pyramids than their Egyptian neighbors, burying kings with beds and archery sets for the afterlife. The ancient Mesopotamians constructed ziggurats, terraced pyramids, where elites were interred with lapis lazuli amulets to navigate the afterlife's treacherous rivers. Even the Guanche people of the Canary Islands stacked stones into pyramidal tombs, their dead surrounded by seashells and goat skulls. What unites these cultures is the pyramid's dual role, as a ladder to the heavens and an anchor to the earth. The Maya painted their pyramids red, the color of lifeblood, while the Aztecs plastered theirs with lime to gleam like sunlit mountains. These structures didn't just memorialize the dead, they channeled their energy back into the living world, ensuring the sun would rise, the rains would come, and the cycle would continue. And as we climb higher, we encounter a culture that turned burial into pure light, the Egyptians, whose pyramids weren't just tombs but machines for resurrection, their corridors aligned with stars that guided pharaohs to immortality. In the quiet corners of Thai homes and temples, you'll find tiny palaces built not for the living, but for souls who have crossed over. These spirit houses, or San Fra Fum, are more than just ornate dollhouses, they're diplomatic embassies between worlds. Crafted with the same intricate carvings and tiered roofs as real Thai architecture, each miniature structure serves as a resting place for the deceased spirit, complete with tiny figurines representing the departed. Families stock them daily with fresh fruit, glasses of water, and even miniature toys for child spirits, treating them not with fear, but with the same hospitality they'd show a honored guest. The logic is simple. A contented spirit won't wander the halls of the living, stirring up mischief or bad luck. This tradition isn't just about appeasement, it's about continuity. Thai Buddhists believe the dead remain connected to their families for weeks or even years after passing, and these offerings sustain them during their transition. Some spirit houses even include miniature cars or bicycles, ensuring the deceased can travel comfortably in the afterlife. During festivals like Loy Krathong, families float tiny lanterns or boats near the spirit houses, symbolizing the soul's eventual release from earthly ties. It's a practice that blends ancient animist beliefs with Buddhist teachings on impermanence, creating a bridge between grief and acceptance. Parallels to this ritual appear worldwide, each culture constructing its own version of post-mortem real estate. In the Philippines, atang, offerings of rice cakes and cigarettes, are left on ancestral graves, while in Mexico, ofrendas during Dia de los Muertos overflow with marigolds and the deceased's favorite meals. The ancient Egyptians took it further, burying scale models of bakeries and breweries in tombs so the dead would never hunger. Even the Victorians had their own spin, building elaborate dollhouses filled with miniature furniture as memento mori, reminders of life's fragility. What makes Thailand's spirit houses unique is their integration into daily life. Unlike hidden graves or sealed tombs, these structures sit prominently in gardens or courtyards, their presence a constant reminder that the dead are still part of the family's story. Paint peels in the tropical heat, incense sticks burn down to ash, and children grow up tending these tiny homes like living heirlooms. The ritual doesn't just house spirits, it keeps memory alive, one offering at a time. From these miniature palaces, we journey to a culture that took eternal dwellings to staggering heights, literally. The cliff tombs of Petra, carved into rose-red stone, turned death into an architectural revolution, their facades glowing like embers at sunset. Here, the dead didn't just get a house, they got a monument meant to outlast empires. High in the misty cliffs of Sagoda, the dead don't rest in the earth, they float above it, their coffins clinging to limestone like the nests of some great, silent bird. The Igorot people have practiced this sky burial for over 2,000 years, carving each coffin from a single tree trunk and hauling it up sheer rock faces with ropes woven from vines. The oldest coffins, bleached silver by centuries of sun and rain, perch precariously on wooden pegs, their shapes weathered into smooth curves by the elements. But this isn't just practical, it's deeply spiritual. The Igorot believe the higher the coffin, the closer the soul gets to ancestral spirits. Some burial sites are so remote that families must scale narrow ledges to leave offerings of rice cakes or tobacco, their voices mingling with the wind that whistles through the hollowed-out wood. What's astonishing is how these coffins mirror the lives they hold. Many are carved with geometric patterns representing the deceased's tattoos, while others are shaped like animals, a python for a hunter, an eagle for a chieftain. One coffin, barely larger than a loaf of bread, cradles an infant swaddled in bark cloth, a tiny guardian watching over the valley below. The Igorot see no morbidity in these hanging graves. They're celebrations of continuity, a way to keep the dead literally elevated in memory. Over time, the pegs decay and coffins crumble into the forest canopy, completing the cycle as the bones return to the land that nourished them. This defiance of gravity isn't unique. In China's Yangtze River gorges, the Ba people suspended coffins in cliffside caves, some wedged into crevices 300 feet above the water. Archaeologists found tools still resting inside: chisels, fishhooks, even lacquered combs, proof that the Ba equipped their dead for an active afterlife. Meanwhile, in Crete's Astarauja Mountains, Minoan burials perch on knife-edge ridges, their occupants facing the sunrise as if awaiting rebirth. Even the ancient Paracas of Peru bound their mummies into bundles, then lowered them into vertical shafts dug into desert cliffs, where the dry air preserved feathers and textiles in vivid color. What unites these sky-high burials is more than logistics, it's a shared conviction that elevation transcends death. The Igorot's cliffs, the Ba's River gorges, the Minoan's peaks, all turn geography into theology, using altitude to bridge worlds. And as we ascend to the next ritual, we find a culture that took this celestial ambition even further, building stairways not of stone but of stars. The Maya's pyramid tombs, aligned with constellations, didn't just defy Earth's pull, they charted courses through the cosmos. The shimmering gold mask of Agamemnon, with its blank, unblinking eyes and delicate beard curls, wasn't just a burial accessory, it was a defiance of time itself. When archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann unearthed it in 1876 at Mycenae, he famously telegrammed a king's declaration, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." Though we now know the mask predates the legendary Trojan War hero by centuries, its power remains undiminished. Crafted by hammering gold leaf over the deceased's features, these masks captured individuality in a way few ancient artifacts could. The arch of an eyebrow, the curve of a lip, freezing nobility in eternal metal. But this wasn't vanity, it was alchemy. The Mycenaeans believed gold's incorruptible sheen mirrored the god's immortality, and by cloaking the dead in its glow, they transformed mortality into something divine. Beyond Greece, cultures worldwide shared this obsession with preserving the face, the human signature. In ancient Egypt, mummy masks like Tutankhamun's, layered with lapis lazuli and gold leaf, served as backup bodies if the real one decayed. The Scythians of Siberia went further, crafting lifelike death masks from leather and felt, their tattoos painstakingly recreated in ink. But perhaps the most haunting examples come from Rome's wax imagines hyper-realistic portraits molded directly from the faces of the deceased, then displayed in ancestral halls. During funerals, actors would wear these masks, embodying generations of ancestors to witness the latest addition to the lineage. It was theater as resurrection, blurring past and present. The materials themselves whispered beliefs. The Maya used jade masks, their green hue symbolizing eternal vegetation, while the Inca chose silver to represent the moon's cool glow. In medieval Europe, death masks became tools of commemoration. Dante's hollow-cheeked face was cast in plaster shortly after his passing, preserving the poet's weary genius for posterity. Even modern traditions echo this. Think of the eerie porcelain death masks of 19th century Europe, or the custom of photographing the dead as if merely asleep. What unites these practices is more than artistry. It's the desperate, beautiful refusal to let a face dissolve into oblivion. When we look at Agamemnon's mask, we're not just seeing gold, we're witnessing the moment a civilization tried to cheat death by turning memory into metal. And as we'll discover next, some cultures took this further, preserving not just faces but entire bodies in postures so lifelike, they seem poised to wake. The Paracas people didn't just bury their dead, they swaddled them like sacred gifts, each layer of cloth a page in a story only the ancestors could read. Along Peru's desert coast, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of these mummy bundles, some as tall as a person. Their outermost wrappings dyed in vivid crimsons and golds, embroidered with figures of snarling felines and soaring condors. Unfold them and you'll find surprises nested like Russian dolls. A central figure crouched in the fetal position, surrounded by smaller bundles, infants perhaps, or offerings, each wrapped in progressively finer textiles, the innermost layers so delicate they shimmer like spider silk. The most elaborate bundles contain up to 20 individual cloths, some woven with patterns so complex they'd take a master weaver months to recreate. This wasn't just preservation, it was artistry in service of eternity. What's haunting is how these bundles blur the line between the individual and the collective. Some contain not just one body but several, a parent cradling a child, or siblings bound together in a final embrace. The Paracas saw death as a communal journey, weaving literal connections between generations. The textiles themselves are coded messages, geometric patterns mapping celestial cycles, or embroidered scenes showing shamans transforming into birds, their arms outstretched as if mid-flight. One famous bundle, now in Lima's Museo Nacional de Arqueologia, features a tapestry of hallucinogenic plants, suggesting the deceased was a healer whose power persisted beyond the grave. This obsession with textile tributes wasn't unique. In the Andes, the Weri culture wrapped elite mummies in tunics woven from vicuña wool, so finely spun they feel like liquid. The Nazca, neighbors to the Paracas, buried their dead wearing capes adorned with trophy heads, a grisly testament to battles won. Even the Chinchorro, those pioneers of mummification, sometimes draped their dead in nets strung with seashells, as if ready to cast them into the ocean's currents. But the Paracas bundles stand apart for their storytelling. Unraveling one is like reading a biography in thread, where every color and stitch encodes a life's milestones, victories in battle, marriages, even encounters with deities. Modern science has revealed even deeper layers. CT scans of unopened bundles show bodies treated with resins to slow decay, their skulls sometimes deliberately reshaped in infancy, a mark of nobility. Some contain miniature looms or spindles, tools for weaving in the afterlife. The Paracas didn't just dress their dead, they equipped them for an eternal craft, ensuring they'd never be idle. It's a poignant reminder that for these cultures, death wasn't an end to labor but a continuation of identity. From Peru's deserts to the Mongolian steppes, textiles have always been more than fabric, they're maps of belief. The Scythians buried their chiefs in felt tents lined with embroidered hangings, while the Vikings wrapped weapons in linen to protect them from rust in the grave. But perhaps no culture wove death and thread together as intimately as the Paracas, whose bundles whisper across millennia. To be remembered, one must first be wrapped in love. Our next ritual spins a different thread, one not of cloth, but of hair. In the highlands of Borneo, the Dayak people keep their dead close by transforming locks of hair into intricate beaded heirlooms, each strand a tangible connection to those who came before. Deep in the peat bogs and oak forests of Bronze Age Europe, death took on the shape of the land itself. The Cladhallen people didn't carve coffins from planks. They hollowed entire oak trunks, fitting each body snugly inside the embrace of a single tree. These log coffins, some over 3,000 years old, reveal a marriage of practicality and poetry. The tannins in the oak acted as natural preservatives, slowing decay while the rounded interior cradled the deceased like a mother's arms. One such coffin, discovered in Denmark, held a woman whose braided hair still clung to her skull, the strands darkened but intact, as if she'd merely fallen asleep in the heartwood. This practice wasn't just about preservation, it was symbiosis. To Bronze Age Europeans, trees were living bridges between earth and sky, their roots delving into the underworld while their branches brushed the heavens. Burying someone inside a trunk wasn't just recycling materials, it was returning them to the cycle of growth and renewal. Archaeologists have found log coffins lined with moss or aromatic herbs, suggesting the dead were tucked in like seeds awaiting rebirth. Some even bore tool marks matching the axes of nearby settlements, linking specific trees to specific families across generations. But Europe wasn't alone in turning to nature's ready-made vessels. In the Pacific Northwest, the Haida and Tlingit peoples crafted mortuary poles from giant cedar trunks, carving crests into the wood before placing chiefs inside the hollowed bases. The Alaskan Yupik sewed their dead into sealskin wraps, then suspended them from driftwood platforms where the sea breeze could carry their spirits. Even the Maori of New Zealand buried high-ranking infants in carved totara logs, the wood's resilience mirroring hopes for the child's enduring legacy. The most striking parallel comes from Siberia's Pazyryk culture, where nomads buried their elite in larchwood coffins packed with permafrost, a natural freezer that preserved tattoos, felted carpets, and even chariots with intact wheels. Like the Cladhallen, they understood that certain materials held power beyond their physical form. A large tree's resistance to rot made it a guardian for eternity, just as oak's tannins staved off time's hunger. What unites these traditions is the refusal to separate death from the landscape that sustained life. The Cladhallen didn't just bury their dead in trees, they let the forest claim them, roots and skeletons intertwining underground. Modern eco-burials, with their biodegradable willow caskets and mushroom suits, echo this ancient logic, proving that some ideas are never truly forgotten, just waiting to be rediscovered. From the heart of oak trunks to the embrace of woven reeds, humanity has always known that the best farewells aren't built, they're grown. And as we trace these roots deeper, we find a culture that took this concept even further, weaving the dead into the very fabric of their homes. The Toraja of Indonesia keep their loved ones close, not beneath the earth, but in bedrooms where they remain part of daily life. The towers of skulls at Cambodia's Choang Ek Memorial rise like silent sentinels, their hollow eyes staring across a landscape still scarred by the Khmer Rouge brutality. Each of the nearly 9,000 skulls stacked behind acrylic panels tells a story, not of how these lives ended, but of how they're remembered. Some bear fractures from farming tools, the grim instruments of genocide repurposed from the very fields where victims once worked. Others are marked by bullet holes, their edges smoothed by time but their message undiminished. This isn't just a burial site, it's a confrontation. The glass that separates visitors from the bones isn't there to protect the dead, it's there to force the living to see. What makes Choang Ek and similar sites across Cambodia so powerful is their refusal to sanitize grief. Unlike traditional memorials with abstract sculptures or polished plaques, these bone houses present death in its rawest form. The skulls aren't anonymous symbols, they're grouped by age and gender, allowing mourners to search for lost relatives among the rows. Personal artifacts, fragments of clothing, wedding rings, even children's toys are displayed alongside, transforming statistics back into people. The effect is visceral. Visitors often describe the overwhelming scent of frangipani trees planted throughout the grounds, their sweetness clashing with the horror embedded in the soil beneath them. Modern societies grapple with how to memorialize mass tragedy without numbing its impact. In Rwanda, the Kigali Genocide Memorial interweaves skulls and bones with photographs of victims mid-laughter, their personalities shining through the darkness. New York's National September 11th Memorial uses cascading water where the Twin Towers once stood, the names of the dead etched into bronze parapets so visitors can trace letters with trembling fingers. Even Chernobyl's abandoned classrooms, frozen in 1986 with tiny gas masks still scattered across floors, serve as accidental monuments to lives interrupted. These sites share a common thread: they reject passive remembrance. The bone houses of Cambodia don't allow you to simply pay respects. They demand you stand witness. School children file past, not to learn history as some distant chapter, but to touch the fractures in their nation's soul. Monks chant over the towers, their saffron robes bright against the bone white, turning atrocity into a space for ritual and healing. The memorial's most haunting feature, the killing tree, where soldiers smashed infants against the trunk while mothers watched. Today, bracelets and ribbons coil around its bark, offerings to souls too young to be named. The evolution of these memorials reveals a shifting relationship with collective grief. Early efforts often focused on concealing trauma. Think of Paris's catacombs, where bones were stacked artistically to distance viewers from their humanity. Now the trend is toward unflinching honesty. Bosnia's Srebrenica Memorial Room keeps victims' shoes behind glass, the leather cracked and faded but their shapes still holding the imprint of the feet that once wore them. South Korea's Jeju April 3rd Peace Park leaves mass graves partially exposed, the Earth's wounds never fully healed. Perhaps what Cambodia teaches us is that memory requires more than marble, it needs marrow. Those towers of skulls aren't just about the past, they're a warning etched in bone, a plea to see the humanity behind every number. As visitors walk away, the heat of the Cambodian sun on their necks, they carry something more profound than sadness, a responsibility to keep the dead not just remembered, but alive in the way we choose to build the future. From the killing fields of Phnom Penh, we turn to a ritual that transforms grief into something tangible not through bones, but through light. Japan's Toro Nagashi lantern festivals send thousands of flickering paper lights down rivers, each one carrying messages to loved ones lost in war and disaster, their glow softening the darkness like fireflies stitching the night back together. Imagine a burial where your body doesn't just return to the earth, it becomes part of a forest. Today's green burials, with their biodegradable willow caskets and mushroom-lined shrouds, might seem like a modern revolution, but they're actually a homecoming. These eco-conscious practices echo rituals as old as humanity itself, from the Tibetan sky burials that feed vultures to the Yanomami tree burials that dissolve into the Amazon's embrace. What's striking isn't just the return to simplicity, it's the recognition that death can be generative, even beautiful. A body wrapped in unbleached cotton and buried without embalming fluids doesn't just avoid polluting the soil, it nourishes it, feeding microbes and roots in a cycle as ancient as life itself. The tools of this movement blend tradition with innovation. In Washington State's Recompose facility, human remains transform into rich compost over weeks, a process inspired by Scandinavian body farms where scientists study natural decomposition. Families take home soil to grow roses or maples, turning grief into something tangible and living. Meanwhile, Italy's Capsula Mundi project buries bodies in biodegradable pods that sprout trees, their roots weaving through bone and ash. Even caskets have evolved. Some now use mycelium, the thread-like network of fungi, to accelerate decomposition while neutralizing toxins. These aren't just practical solutions, they're philosophical statements, rejecting the modern obsession with embalming and concrete vaults in favor of a simpler truth. Decay isn't failure, it's the engine of renewal. What's revealing is how closely these practices mirror indigenous wisdom. The Maori of New Zealand have long buried placenta and umbilical cords under newly planted trees, binding generations to the land. The Zoroastrians' towers of silence, with their reliance on scavengers, functioned as nature's recycling system centuries before the term sustainability existed. Even Victorian-era cemeteries, with their sprawling gardens, hinted at this symbiosis before industrial funeral practices severed the connection. Today's green burials don't just reduce carbon footprints, they repair a broken relationship with the natural world, acknowledging that death isn't separate from life's web but a vital thread within it. The most radical shift isn't in the technology but the mindset. Families now choose burial reefs where cremated remains mix with marine-grade concrete to form habitats for coral and fish. Others opt for water cremation, using alkaline hydrolysis to dissolve tissues gently, leaving behind sterile liquid and bones. These methods aren't just eco-friendly, they're narrative-changing, transforming death from an end into a continuum. When a body becomes a tree or a reef, mourning takes new forms. You don't just visit a grave, you watch swallows nest in branches grown from your loved one's remains or snorkel above their undersea legacy. Yet challenges remain. Legal barriers in many regions still mandate embalming or metal caskets, relics of a death-phobic 20th century. Cultural expectations clash, too. Some find comfort in polished headstones and perpetual grave care, uneasy with the idea of untended forest graves. But the tide is turning. The UK's natural burial grounds have grown from one in 1993 to over 200 today, while California now requires cemeteries to disclose greener options. Even the fashion industry is joining designers create memorial wear embedded with wildflower seeds, so garments literally blossom when buried. This movement's power lies in its humility. It doesn't promise eternity through pyramids or cryonics, but offers something more profound, a chance to become rain, grass, the wingbeat of a sparrow. As we relearn what ancient societies never forgot, we're left with a quiet revelation. The greenest funerals aren't just about saving the planet, they're about remembering we never left it. From these quiet returns to the earth, we turn to a ritual that defies gravity entirely: space burials, where ashes orbit the planet as stardust, merging humanity's oldest questions with its newest frontiers. The idea of cheating death doesn't end with ancient embalming or sky burials today. It's gone sub-zero. Cryonics, the practice of freezing human bodies or brains in liquid nitrogen at -196 degrees Celsius, isn't just modern mummification. It's a gamble on technology's ability to rewrite mortality itself. Imagine a stainless steel tank filled with bodies suspended upside down, their tissues vitrified into glass-like states, their brains preserved with antifreeze chemicals. This isn't a sci-fi movie set. It's the reality inside facilities like Arizona's Alka Life Extension Foundation, where hundreds of patients, not corpses, as adherents insist wait for a future that might never come. The process reads like a cross between a medical procedure and an alchemist's ritual. Within moments of legal death, a cryonics team springs into action, cooling the body with ice baths while pumping in preservatives to minimize cell damage. The blood is replaced with a cryoprotectant solution to prevent ice crystals, nature's tiny daggers, from shredding tissues. Then comes the slow descent into ultra-cold, where time effectively stops. Advocates argue death isn't a sudden event but a series of failures, and if you pause the process early enough, future nanotech or advanced medicine could reverse it. It's a radical twist on an old impulse. The pharaohs built pyramids, we build duors. Critics dismiss cryonics as expensive wishful thinking, pointing to the lack of evidence that brains retain memories after freezing or that revival is even possible. Ethicists debate whether future societies would prioritize resurrecting frozen strangers over their own crises. Yet the practice raises profound questions. Is death a fixed line or a frontier? The ancient Egyptians believed the soul needed a preserved body to recognize itself in the afterlife. Cryonicists echo this, insisting continuity of form matters. Even the language overlaps. Alka's website speaks of patience in biostasis, terms that feel more clinical than corpse or grave. Parallels to cryonics emerge in unexpected places. The Scythians of Siberia buried their elite in permafrost, unknowingly preserving tattoos and fabrics for millennia. The Inuit practiced temporary ice burials, storing bodies until summer thaw allowed proper ceremonies. But cryonics isn't just preservation, it's anticipation, betting that tomorrow's science will solve today's impossibilities. Some companies now offer neuropreservation, freezing only heads in hopes that future tech can regenerate bodies or upload consciousness. It's a macabre lottery where the prize is a second chance. From frozen chambers to digitized minds, the next ritual doesn't just pause time, it shatters it. Imagine a future where death isn't conquered by biology but bypassed by code, where your thoughts live on in silicon as a ghost in the machine. The line between science and spirituality blurs once more, and the oldest human question, what happens when we die, gets a radical new answer. The final frontier has become more than a dream. It's now a resting place, space burials where ashes are launched into orbit or beyond. turned the cosmos into a cemetery without borders. Companies like Celestis and Elysium Space send capsules no larger than a lipstick tube into the void, each packed with a few grams of cremated remains. These missions cater to the adventurous scientists, astronauts, and starry-eyed dreamers who spent their lives gazing upward. One payload even included Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, his ashes now drifting among the stars that inspired his stories. It's the ultimate blend of cutting-edge technology and age-old longing. If ancient cultures built pyramids to touch the sky, we now hitch rides on rockets. What's fascinating is how these burials echo ancient beliefs while rewriting the rules. The Egyptians aligned tombs with constellations. The Maya charted their dead's path through the Milky Way. Now, instead of symbols, we send physical remnants. Some capsules circle Earth like artificial stars before burning up on re-entry, a fleeting meteor shower as a final tribute. Others aim for deeper space. NASA, a New Horizons probe, carried ashes of Pluto's discoverer, Clyde Tombaugh, on its historic flyby. There's poetry in the idea that part of him now wanders the Kuiper Belt, forever bound to the dwarf planet he revealed to humanity. Yet these celestial farewells raise questions: who owns space's silence? While current launches are tightly regulated, the growing interest could one day clutter orbits with memorials. Some companies offer lunar landings, their capsules resting beside the footprints of Apollo astronauts, a gesture that blurs the line between tribute and trespass. And what of traditions? For millennia, cultures buried their dead where descendants could honor them. How do you leave flowers on a grave that orbits every 90 minutes? The answers might lie in hybrid rituals. Families receive GPS coordinates to visit loved ones via satellite imagery, tracing their path across the globe. Others gather under star maps, tracking capsules like cosmic comets. It's a new kind of ancestor worship, where technology bridges the gap between Earth and eternity. Even the act of launch becomes ceremony. One company streams footage of the rocket's ascent, turning countdowns into collective mourning. From the icy silence of space to the digital realm, the next ritual doesn't defy death, it redefines it. Imagine a future where your memories aren't etched in stone, but encoded in servers, your voice answering questions you never lived to hear. The line between burial and backup blurs, and humanity's oldest question, what remains when we're gone, gets an answer as vast as the universe itself. Beneath the waves off the coast of Florida, death blooms into life in the most unexpected way. Through memorial reefs, these underwater sanctuaries aren't just poetic metaphors. They're vibrant ecosystems where cremated remains are mixed with environmentally safe concrete and molded into structures that mimic natural coral. Over time, sponges, oysters, and fish colonize the porous surfaces, transforming human ashes into habitats for darting damselfish and swaying sea fans. It's a burial that doesn't just return to the earth, it actively heals it, turning grief into something that breathes beneath the tides. The process is as precise as it is profound. Cremated remains are blended with a special pH-neutral concrete, then cast into shapes designed to maximize marine life attachment: domes, stars, even replicas of sea turtles. Families often place small tokens inside the mixture: seashells, handwritten notes, or even tiny mementos that won't harm the ocean. Once submerged, the reef ball joins dozens of others, forming an artificial reef that can last centuries. Divers visit these sites to lay wreaths or simply watch as parrotfish nibble at the edges, their bright colors a stark contrast to the solemnity above the surface. This practice isn't just an ecological win, it's a spiritual homecoming for cultures with deep ties to the sea. Polynesian voyagers who once sent their chiefs adrift on canoes would likely recognize the intent: to merge with the waters that sustain them. Even the Vikings, with their flaming ship burials, might nod at the logic using death to fuel new life. But memorial reefs add a modern twist, addressing urgent environmental needs. Coral reefs are vanishing at an alarming rate, and these structures don't just memorialize individuals, they rebuild what humanity has broken. Yet reefs aren't the only innovation redefining burial. In Sweden, Polynesian uses liquid nitrogen to freeze bodies, then vibrates them into a fine, biodegradable powder, a process that leaves no toxins behind. The resulting soil can nourish trees, creating living memorials without coffins or chemicals. Meanwhile, South Korea's death beads transform cremated remains into colorful glass orbs, some swirling with ashes like miniature galaxies. Families display them in sunlight where they cast prismatic shadows, a far cry from the somber urns of the past. What unites these practices is a shift from passive decay to active regeneration. Where traditional burials often isolate the dead behind stone walls, these methods weave them back into the world's fabric. A reef ball teeming with life, a tree rooted in loved ones' molecules, a glass bead catching the light. Each refuses the idea that death is an end. Instead, they whisper, the departed can still feed, shelter, and dazzle. From the ocean's depths, we surface to a ritual that defies gravity, entirely space burials, where ashes orbit Earth as man-made constellations, forever circling the planet they once called home. The idea of wearing a loved one's ashes around your neck might sound like science fiction, but modern technology has turned this into a shimmering reality. Laboratories can now compress carbon extracted from cremated remains into flawless diamonds, transforming grief into something breathtakingly tangible. The process is a marvel of precision. After purifying the ashes to isolate carbon, technicians subject it to extreme heat and pressure, conditions mimicking Earth's mantle, where the atoms rearrange into crystalline structures. Weeks later, what emerges isn't just a gemstone. It's a physical continuation of a life, its color determined by trace elements: blue from boron, yellow from nitrogen, each hue as unique as the person it memorializes. This ritual redefines what it means to keep someone close. Unlike urns tucked away on shelves, these diamonds become part of daily life, catching the light on a ring or pendant, turning moments of remembrance into quiet flashes of brilliance. Families share stories of passing these heirlooms to new generations, the stones outliving memories themselves, but the symbolism runs deeper than permanence. Diamonds forged under pressure mirror the resilience of those left behind, their sparkle, a testament to love that refuses to dim. Yet this isn't the only way ashes are being reimagined. In Japan, companies incorporate remains into vibrant glass orbs, swirling pigments into molten silica to create paperweights or wind chimes that sing in the breeze. Artists in the American Southwest blend ashes with glaze, firing them into ceramic pieces that adorn homes as functional art. Even space isn't off limits. Some opt to have ashes pressed into vinyl records, their grooves encoding voices or favorite songs, a literal soundtrack of a life. What unites these innovations is their rejection of passive mourning. They don't just store remains, they animate them, integrating loss into life's rhythm. A diamond's gleam during a morning coffee, a glass orb's chime at sunset. These rituals dissolve the boundary between absence and presence. And as we'll see next, some cultures have always treated death as a beginning, not an end, weaving the departed into the very fabric of the future. From the laboratory's sterile brilliance to the artisan's fiery kiln, these transformations prove grief doesn't have to gather dust. It can dazzle, sing, and endure in forms as dynamic as the lives it honors. The next ritual takes this idea even further. turning ashes into something that doesn't just remember life but sustains it. The Living Urns movement turns grief into something that literally takes root, ashes mingled with soil and seeds, tucked into biodegradable urns shaped like acorns or lotus pods, then planted where they'll sprout into saplings. It's a ritual that doesn't just memorialize the dead, it invites them back into the cycle of growth. Picture a family kneeling in a forest clearing, pressing soil around a vessel made of coconut shell or recycled paper, knowing that within months the urn will dissolve and the remains inside will nourish the roots of a young maple or dogwood. The tree becomes a living monument, its leaves whispering in the wind, its branches offering shelter to birds, a far cry from the static silence of a headstone. This practice isn't just poetic, it's deeply pragmatic. Traditional burials often involve concrete vaults, embalming fluids, and non-biodegradable caskets, turning cemeteries into landscapes of preserved decay. Living urns flip that logic, leveraging death to regenerate rather than stagnate. The urns themselves are feats of eco-engineering. Some contain pH-balancing agents to neutralize cremated remains' alkalinity, ensuring the soil stays fertile. Others include mycorrhizal fungi to help roots absorb nutrients, a quiet nod to nature's own networks of renewal. Families can choose species with personal significance, an olive tree for peace, a cherry blossom for fleeting beauty, or a sturdy oak for resilience. The symbolism echoes ancient traditions in surprising ways, like the Zoroastrian towers of silence, where bodies return to the ecosystem through scavengers, or the Yanomami tree burials, where the dead dissolve into the rainforest canopy. Living urns reject the idea of separation from nature. Even the choice of tree species can mirror cultural values. The Japanese might select a ginkgo for its longevity, while Scandinavians could opt for a birch, a tree associated with renewal in Norse mythology. The ritual's flexibility is its strength, allowing mourners to tailor it to their beliefs, whether they see the tree as a metaphor for the soul's endurance or simply a practical act of environmental stewardship. Yet this modern ritual also grapples with timeless questions. How do we balance remembrance with letting go? A tree grows and changes, its trunk thickening, its leaves falling and regrowing, unlike a grave marker which stays fixed. Some families find comfort in that evolution, watching their loved one's legacy literally flourish. Others struggle with the lack of permanence, fearing that storms or disease could destroy the living memorial. Companies now offer solutions, from GPS tags to track the tree's location to hybrid urns that allow partial burial with a traditional marker nearby. The tension between holding on and releasing mirrors humanity's oldest struggle: how to honor the past without being trapped by it. From these rooted memorials, we turn to a ritual that floats literally. The next practice takes ashes not into the earth, but onto the water, releasing them in biodegradable vessels that dissolve like salt, carrying grief out with the tide. Imagine receiving a birthday message from a loved one who passed years ago. Their voice, their mannerisms, even their laugh perfectly preserved in a digital avatar that learns and adapts. This isn't science fiction, it's the cutting edge of mourning in the digital age. Companies like Here After AI and Project December now craft interactive profiles using chatbots trained on a person's texts, emails, and voice recordings, allowing survivors to converse with simulations of the deceased. One woman described asking her late father's AI about his wartime experiences, hearing stories she'd never known, his digital ghost filling silences that once felt permanent. But these innovations aren't just about replication, they're redefining legacy. Online memorials like Forever Missed or Virtual Eternity let users curate tribute pages where photos, videos, and even GPS coordinates of significant locations create immersive biographies. Grievers can light virtual candles, leave video messages, or watch timelines where a life unfolds in digital scrapbook form. In South Korea, families use hologram performances to reunite with deceased celebrities, while startups like Deep Brain AI create lifelike avatars that recite custom speeches at funerals. The boundaries between presence and absence blur, challenging ancient rituals where burial sites anchored remembrance. Yet this digital afterlife raises ethical quicksand. Who owns the data of the dead? A court in Germany recently ruled that parents couldn't access their deceased daughter's Facebook messages, privacy extending beyond the grave. And what happens when AI evolves beyond its training? One man's attempt to chat with his late fiancée devolved into the bot improvising hurtful phrases she'd never say, turning comfort into trauma. Some cultures resist entirely. Japan's Shinto tradition views digital avatars as disruptive to the soul's journey, while Orthodox Jewish law mandates physical burial without digital interference. The most profound shift may be in how we process loss. Traditional graves offer a fixed point for grief, a place to weep, reflect, and eventually heal. Digital memorials, though, are endlessly updatable, turning mourning into an open-ended dialogue. A widow might ask her husband's AI for advice years later, or a child might introduce their avatar grandparent to milestones they never witnessed. This constant accessibility risks freezing grief in place, like a wound that never scars. Yet for those isolated by geography or circumstance, these tools can be lifelines, bridging distances that physical graves can't. From holograms to chatbots, technology isn't replacing burial rituals, it's expanding their vocabulary. Just as the Egyptians built pyramids to defy time, we're crafting digital monuments to outpace oblivion. And as we'll see next, some are taking this even further, bypassing decay not with bytes, but with biology where human remains become part of the living world in ways that would astonish even the most forward-thinking ancient cultures. In the bustling workshops of Accra, Ghana, death isn't hidden behind somber black caskets, it's paraded in technicolor glory. Fantasy coffins, or abebu adekai, transform funerals into celebrations so vivid they defy grief itself. Picture a fisherman laid to rest inside a giant wooden tilapia, its scales painted in shimmering blues and golds. A taxi driver might ride into the afterlife in a polished Mercedes coffin, complete with working headlights, while a grandmother who loved her garden could be tucked into a towering cocoa pod, its curves carved with such precision you'd almost expect it to split open and sprout. These aren't just containers for the dead, they're masterpieces of storytelling, each chisel and brushstroke whispering, "This is who I was, and this is how I'll be remembered." The tradition sprang from the Ga people's belief that death marks a transition to another realm, one where the deceased continues their life's work. A carpenter might be buried with a coffin shaped like a hammer, a pilot in a sleek airplane, their tools for eternity rendered in mahogany and acrylic. The artisans who craft these coffins, often third-generation carpenters like the renowned Pajot, treat their work as sacred theater. Months of labor go into a single piece, with hidden compartments for the body and intricate details that boggle the eye. A leopard coffin with individually carved whiskers, or a Bible-shaped casket with gilt-edged pages that swing open. The result, funerals where mourners gasp and laugh through tears, where the coffin becomes the centerpiece of a parade, hoisted high as dancers drum its journey to the grave. This fusion of art and mortality isn't unique to Ghana. In New Orleans jazz funerals, brass bands play upbeat dirges as mourners twirl parasols, turning the procession into a block party. Bali's Ungaban ceremony sends the dead skyward on flaming towers adorned with papier-mâché monsters and gold leaf. their ashes scattered in rivers to mingle with the sacred. Even the Victorians, for all their stiff collars, pinned locks of hair into brooches or wove them into intricate wreaths, carrying their loved ones literally on their sleeves. What sets Ghana's fantasy coffins apart is their refusal to let death erase individuality. In a world where modern funerals often sand down rough edges into cookie-cutter ceremonies, these coffins scream, "I lived." A teacher might choose an oversized pencil, a footballer a cleat, their passions immortalized in wood. Families sometimes commission coffins that playfully nod to inside jokes. A baker buried in a giant loaf of bread, its crust so realistic you can almost smell it. The humor isn't disrespectful, it's defiance. Grief, these artisans say, doesn't have to wear black. Yet beneath the dazzle lies deep pragmatism. Many fantasy coffins double as family heirlooms, displayed in homes for years before use. Their presence a reminder that death isn't to be feared but prepared for with creativity and joy. In a country where life expectancy hovers around 64, these coffins are a middle finger to mortality's shadow, a way to wrest control back from the inevitable. When a loved one's coffin rolls past shaped like a rooster because they adored dawn walks, or a sewing machine because they stitched the community together, death doesn't get the last word, life does. From Accra's vibrant streets, we turn to a ritual where personalization takes a quieter, but no less profound form. In Japan's Kotswage ceremony, families use chopsticks to pluck bone fragments from ashes, each careful transfer a final act of tenderness for the departed. Here, intimacy isn't carved in wood, it's held in the space between two slender sticks, in the silence of a shared, sacred task. In a quiet cemetery in Sweden, mourners gather around a grave not with hymns or eulogies, but with wireless headphones. As the playlist starts, some weep, others smile, a few even sway to a beat only they can hear. This is the silent disco funeral, where the departed are buried with their favorite songs streaming into the ears of those they left behind. One widow described burying her husband to the sound of David Bowie's Starman, his boots polished and laced, his headphones resting on his chest like a final gift. It's a ritual that feels both irreverent and deeply intimate, a private concert where grief and joy share the same dance floor. Music has always been part of mourning, but these headphone ceremonies flip the script. Ancient Egyptians sent their dead off with sistrum rattles and harp songs, believing melodies guided souls through the underworld. Tibetan Buddhists still use ceremonial horns to scare away malevolent spirits, while New Orleans jazz funerals turn sorrow into second-line celebrations. The silent disco funeral isn't a rejection of tradition, it's an evolution. Instead of a soma organ or a prescribed hymn, it offers a personal soundtrack, the mixtape you'd make for someone who'll never hear it, played at the one moment they somehow might. What's striking is how technology reshapes these moments. Companies like and Vinily now press ashes into playable records, embedding voices or favorite songs in the grooves. One family chose to press their father's laugh into the runoff track, so the needle catches it in loops at the end. Others use QR codes on headstones, linking to Spotify playlists that visitors can stream on their phones, a digital era version of Leaving Flowers. Even the headphones themselves become relics, biodegradable models made from mycelium or recycled materials ensure the ritual honors the earth as much as the departed. Yet this trend isn't just about personalization, it's about reclaiming agency. Traditional funerals often follow scripts that don't fit the lives they memorialize. A silent disco funeral lets a punk fan go out to The Clash, a poet to Patti Smith, a child to the theme song of their favorite cartoon. The music becomes a biography in chords and lyrics, a way to say, this was the rhythm of their heart. At one such funeral in Brighton, mourners wore glow sticks and danced to Daft Punk, their tears glittering under fairy lights. The deceased's mother later said he hated silence. Why would we bury him in it? From silent discos to sonic headstones, these rituals prove mourning doesn't have to be muted. And as we'll see next, some are taking sound even further, transforming vibrations into physical monuments that don't just play music but become instruments themselves. The next ritual doesn't just remember the dead, it lets them sing. The needle buzzes, etching not just ink but memory into skin. A tattoo artist in London mixes a pinch of cremation ashes into pigment, turning a client's tribute to their late mother into something more than art. It's a physical fusion, the carbon from her bones now entwined with living cells, her presence marked not on stone but on a daughter's forearm. This isn't just body modification, it's alchemy where grief becomes a permanent embrace. Across the globe, memorial tattoos infused with ashes are rewriting the rules of mourning, offering a ritual so intimate it blurs the line between the living and the dead. The process demands precision. Cremated remains must be sterilized at extreme temperatures to eliminate pathogens, then ground into a fine powder that won't clog tattoo machines. Artists often blend the ash with ink, creating shades that retain a subtle texture, a whisper of grit under the skin. Some designs incorporate symbolic imagery, sparrows for freedom, compass roses for guidance, or handwritten script lifted directly from old letters. One widower chose his wife's fingerprint looped into a heartbeat line over his chest. Her unique swirls forever sync to his pulse. The result isn't just visual, it's tactile. Wearers describe tracing the lines with their fingers during moments of longing, as if touch could bridge the gap between worlds. This ritual taps into a primal instinct to keep the dead close. Ancient Egyptians entombed jewelry containing hair locks, while Victorians wove mourning brooches with strands of a loved one's hair under glass. The Maoris' Tomoko facial tattoos traditionally honored ancestors by carving their stories into living flesh. But ash tattoos take this further, dissolving the metaphysical into the biological. Scientists confirm that carbon from cremains can integrate into skin cells, making the metaphor literal. The departed become part of the survivor's body, their molecules lingering as long as the tattoo itself. Yet the practice isn't without controversy. Some cultures, like Orthodox Judaism and Islam, prohibit tampering with ashes, considering it a violation of the body's sanctity. Even secular critics question the ethics. What if relationships sour or grief fades? Tattoo artists share stories of clients requesting cover-ups years later, their skin now a palimpsest of healed pain. Others worry about commercialization, with unscrupulous studios offering ash ink without proper sterilization. The best practitioners treat it as sacred work, requiring death certificates and consent forms, ensuring the ritual honors both the dead and the living. What's undeniable is the ritual's power to externalize inner sorrow. A sailor in Norway had his father's ashes inked into a ship's wheel on his back, the design positioned so his young son could steer grandpa's memory with tiny hands. A Brazilian dancer mixed her sister's ashes into a swirling samba silhouette, its motion capturing her spirit. These tattoos don't just memorialize, they activate loss, turning passive grief into a daily dialogue. And as we'll see next, some cultures take this idea of embodied remembrance even further, not with ink, but with sound, transforming vibrations into monuments that don't just depict the dead, but let them speak. The clink of teacups and the murmur of voices fill the air, but this isn't your average afternoon tea. At death cafes, strangers gather in cozy corners of coffee shops and living rooms to discuss the one topic most avoid: mortality. These meetings, now held in over 80 countries, aren't grief counseling sessions or morbid debates. They're spaces where people share stories, fears, and even laughter over slices of cake, reviving an ancient truth that death isn't meant to be faced in isolation. The model is simple: no agendas, no sales pitches, just open conversation. A grandmother might recount her near-death experience, while a young parent wrestles with how to explain loss to their child. The result: something extraordinary happens when death is stripped of its taboo. Walls come down and strangers become allies in the shared human journey. This movement, founded by Swiss sociologist Bernard Cretas in 2004 and popularized by John Underwood in London, taps into a tradition far older than espresso machines. For centuries, communities mourned collectively. Irish wakes turned grief into raucous celebration. Mexican families picnicked at grave sites during Dia de los Muertos, and Victorian families posed with deceased loved ones in post-mortem photographs. Death wasn't hidden behind hospital curtains or funeral home brochures. It was baked into daily life. The Death Cafe's brilliance lies in reclaiming that communal intimacy, but with a modern twist. Instead of prescribed rituals, attendees shape the dialogue, whether debating green burials, pondering the ethics of AI legacies, or simply admitting they're terrified of oblivion. What makes these gatherings so transformative isn't just the talking, it's the listening. A study in the BMJ Supportive and Palliative Care Journal found participants left with less anxiety about dying, not because they'd found answers, but because they'd been heard. One attendee described the relief of hearing someone say, "I feel that too," after she confessed her fear of being forgotten. Another realized mid-conversation that her aversion to cremation wasn't about the flames, it was about never having chosen anything for herself until now. These aren't theoretical discussions, they're catalysts for living more intentionally. Yet death cafes also reveal cultural divides. In Japan, where death is often considered kege, ritually impure, meetings tend to be quieter, with more focus on ancestral traditions. In contrast, American sessions frequently grapple with the medicalization of dying, the frustration of fighting cancer rather than living with it. The cafes don't homogenize grief, they highlight how differently societies cradle mortality. Even the snacks served reflect this. British hosts favor Victoria sponge cake, a nod to comfort food, while Swedish organizers might offer fika, a coffee break ritual that embodies slowing down. The ripple effects extend beyond the tea table. Some attendees launch community death care collectives, teaching others to wash and dress bodies at home. Others pen advance directives over dessert, realizing they'd rather dictate their last chapter than leave it to strangers. One group in Canada even started a death over drafts spin-off at a local brewery, proving these conversations don't require somber settings. The most radical outcome, normalizing death as a creative act. When a young artist shared her plan to compose a symphony timed to her hospice stay, the room didn't balk, they brainstormed venues. From these conversations, a new ritual is emerging, one where death isn't whispered in hushed tones but discussed over steaming cups, where the greatest comfort isn't avoiding the end but facing it together. And as we'll see next, some are taking this honesty even further, designing their own farewells long before they're needed, because the best endings, like the best stories, deserve thought. Imagine slipping on a headset and suddenly standing in your childhood kitchen, your grandmother humming as she stirs a pot of soup, her voice, her gestures, the way sunlight once spilled through the window, all perfectly recreated. This isn't just memory, it's virtual reality's latest frontier, memorials that defy distance, time, and even death itself. Companies like Here After AI and Storyfile are pioneering immersive experiences where users can converse with digital avatars of the deceased, built from hours of interviews, videos, and voice recordings. These aren't static holograms, but interactive entities that respond to questions, share stories, and even crack familiar jokes, blurring the line between presence and absence in ways that would astonish ancient cultures who carved effigies or preserved voices on wax cylinders. The technology behind these VR memorials is as intricate as it is intimate. Motion capture preserves subtle mannerisms, the way someone tucked their hair behind their ear or leaned forward when excited. Machine learning analyzes speech patterns to generate responses the person might have given, weaving new dialogues from old phrases. One widower described asking his wife's avatar about her favorite memory of their wedding day, hearing her laugh and describe the rain that nearly ruined her hair, a detail he'd forgotten until the AI resurrected it. For families separated by oceans or generations, these tools offer a semblance of reunion. A granddaughter in Tokyo can walk alongside her grandfather's digital twin through the cherry groves of his youth, even though he passed decades before she was born. Yet this innovation sparks profound ethical debates. Buddhist scholars argue that virtual visits might trap souls in a digital bardo, hindering reincarnation. Jewish rabbis question whether virtual Yazite candles fulfill mourning obligations. Even secular critics worry about the psychological toll. Does seeing a loved one alive in VR delay acceptance of loss? Some users report bittersweet comfort, like a man who plays chess weekly with his father's avatar, savoring the ritual even when the AI makes moves his dad never would. Others describe unnerving moments when the avatar veers off script, inventing stories that feel like eerie fabrications. The most poignant applications emerge in spaces where physical memorials are impossible. After the 2023 Lahaina wildfires destroyed entire cemeteries, survivors used VR to reconstruct ancestral gravesites from photos and oral histories. Ukrainian families displaced by war now preserve hometown landmarks in digital archives, ensuring children can someday stand in squares reduced to rubble. These virtual spaces become more than memorials, they're acts of resistance against erasure, proving that memory can outlast stone. What lies beyond? Startups are already experimenting with haptic feedback, letting users hold a deceased loved one's hand through sensor gloves. Others explore scent integration, releasing a whiff of perfume or pipe tobacco at key moments. The ultimate goal isn't to replace human grief, but to reshape its geography, turning the uncharted territory of loss into a landscape we can navigate together, one pixel at a time. From VR headsets to neural interfaces that translate brainwaves into digital voices, mourning's next frontier may dissolve the boundary between the living and the dead entirely. Yet beneath the silicon and code, the ancient impulse remains unchanged, to whisper across the abyss, "I still see you." From towering pyramids to orbiting capsules of stardust, every culture has wrestled with the same unanswerable question: how do we honor those who have left us? These 40 rituals aren't just historical footnotes, they're masterclasses in human ingenuity, each one a defiant spark against the dark unknown. The Egyptians built stone mountains to cheat time, the Zoroastrians entrusted their dead to circling vultures, and today we press ashes into diamonds or dissolve them into living coral reefs. What unites them all isn't just creativity, it's courage. The courage to stare into the void and insist, this life mattered. Some traditions whisper of reconciliation with nature, like the Yanomama's tree burials or Sweden's mushroom suits that turn bodies into clean compost. Others scream defiance, like the Terracotta army standing guard for millennia or cryonicists betting on future science to reawaken frozen minds. Then there are the quiet revolutions gone as fantasy coffins that turn funerals into celebrations, or death cafes where strangers share cake and confess their fears over steaming cups of tea. Every ritual, whether etched in gold or woven into virtual reality, answers the same yearning to be remembered, to remain part of the story. What's astonishing isn't just the diversity, it's the threads that bind them. The same hands that carved jade death masks for Han emperors now 3D print mini reefs from cremated ash. The love that stacked stones on Celtic graves today arranges digital altars with looping video tributes. Tools change, but the heart's cry doesn't. Whether we're launching loved ones into orbit or planting them as saplings, we're still doing what the ancients did, refusing to let death have the last word. So which of these 40 traditions lingers in your thoughts? Maybe it's the Viking ship burning against the twilight, or the Paracas mummy bundles wrapped in stories instead of linen. Perhaps it's the quiet dignity of a Tibetan sky burial, where the body's last gift is sustaining other lives. Whatever resonates, it's proof that grief, in all its forms, is universal, but how we carry it is endlessly, beautifully unique. Drop a comment below with the ritual that moved you, and if you've enjoyed this journey through humanity's most profound farewells, hit subscribe for more explorations where history and mystery collide. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers of the past. They have so much to teach us.